She should have been dead 3 days ago. The cannon blast took both her legs. The soldiers took everything else. Her people, her own blood, left her in that ravine to rot under the Arizona sun. Ants crawled across her open wounds. Vultures circled. She didn't scream, didn't beg. She just waited for the darkness to swallow her whole. But then a stranger found her. A broken cowboy with ghosts in his eyes and a choice that could kill them both. This is their story. Stay till the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Arizona sun had no mercy. It beat down on the ravine like a hammer on an anvil, relentless and cruel, baking the red clay until it cracked into jagged patterns that looked like dried veins. The air shimmered with heat, distorting the distant mesas into wavering mirages. Nothing moved except the buzzards, black silhouettes wheeling lazy circles against a sky bleached white by the brutal light. And at the bottom of that ravine, half buried in dust and her own blood, Ayla Redhawk waited to die. She'd stopped counting the days. Time had become meaningless, measured only by the crawl of shadows across the rocks and the rhythm of her failing heartbeat. The pain had evolved beyond agony into something else entirely, a constant grinding presence that filled every corner of her consciousness. Her legs were gone, not lost, not missing, gone. Torn away by the cannon blast that had shattered the world into fire and screaming chaos. The memory flickered through her fever like lightning through storm clouds. The ambush had come at dawn, 3 days ago. Or was it 4? The cavalry had tracked them through the night, following the traces her people had tried so hard to hide. Captain Merrick, they called him. A man with ice-blue eyes and a reputation for finishing what he started. His soldiers had set up on the ridge, brass cannons gleaming in the first light, and when they opened fire, it wasn't war. It was annihilation. Ayla had been at the rear guard, covering the retreat of the elders and children. She'd taken down 2 soldiers with her rifle before the world exploded. The shell hit the boulder beside her, and the force of it, the sheer, incomprehensible violence, had lifted her off her feet and slammed her into the rock face. When the dust cleared and the ringing in her ears subsided enough to think, she'd looked down and seen the ruin of her body. Both legs. Gone below the knee. The right one sheared clean, the left a twisted mess of bone and flesh held together by sinew and stubborn will. She'd screamed then. Once. A raw animal sound that tore from her throat and echoed off the canyon walls. After that, silence. Her people had found her in the chaos of retreat. She remembered their faces, the horror, the grief, the terrible calculation. They were being hunted. They had children to protect. Wounded who could still walk. Supplies that wouldn't last another week. And Ayla couldn't walk. Couldn't ride. Could barely breathe without agony lancing through her chest. Her cousin, Nawel, had knelt beside her. His hand shook as he pressed a water skin to her lips. "I'm sorry," he'd whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Ayla." She'd understood. Even through the fog of shock and pain, she'd understood. "Go," she'd told him. Her voice had sounded strange, distant, as if someone else was speaking through her throat. "Get them to safety. We can't just go." She'd gripped his wrist with what little strength she had left. "Don't let them die for me. I'm already dead." They'd left her water, a knife, a blanket to shield her from the sun, and then they'd vanished like smoke, slipping through the ravines and arroyos toward the sanctuary of the deep desert, where the cavalry's horses would falter and their supplies would run dry, leaving Ayla alone with the sun and the stones and the slow, grinding certainty of death. That first day, she'd tried to move. The attempt had lasted maybe 20 seconds before the pain drove her into unconsciousness. When she woke, flies were crawling across her wounds, and the sun had shifted an hour toward evening. The second day, she'd managed to drag herself 3 feet toward shade before her strength gave out. 3 feet. The knife lay beside her hand, blade glinting. It would be easy, she'd thought. Quick. One cut, deep and sure, and the waiting would be over. But something in her, some stubborn, furious core of defiance, wouldn't let her do it. If death wanted her, it would have to take her fighting. The third day, the fever came. It rolled through her body in waves, burning away thought and reason, leaving only fragments, Images, sounds, sensations disconnected from time. She saw her mother's face, young and laughing, teaching her to string a bow. Her father's hands, scarred and strong, showing her how to track deer through autumn leaves. The campfires of her childhood, sparks rising into the star-thick night, while the old ones told stories of heroes and tricksters and the time before the white men came. Were those memories or dreams? She couldn't tell anymore. The ants found her on the fourth day, or maybe it was still the third. Time had lost all meaning. They came in a black river, thousands of them, following the scent of blood and decay. They crawled across her skin, into her wounds, exploratory and patient. She didn't have the strength to brush them away, didn't have the energy to care. Let them feast. Let the buzzards come. Let the desert take what was left. She'd done her part, fought when there was still something to fight for. And now, with her people safe and her body broken beyond repair, she could finally stop. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, crushing the air from her lungs. This is how it ends, she thought, as consciousness began to slip away again. Alone, forgotten, fed to the insects and the scavengers. There were worse fates. She closed her eyes and let the darkness take her. Colton Vance didn't believe in fate, destiny, or any of that mystical horseshit people used to explain away the random cruelty of the world. He believed in hard ground, scarce water, and the fact that every man died alone no matter how many friends he thought he had. He believed in distance, space between himself and anything that might require him to care. That's why he'd built his ranch at the edge of nowhere, 20 miles from the nearest town, tucked into a fold of red rock country where the land was too hostile for farming and too remote for cattle barons to bother claiming. Just him, a dozen scraggly cattle, a well that barely produced, and silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat at night. It suited him fine. He'd left the world behind after the war, that grinding, pointless nightmare of blood and mud where men killed strangers over lines on a map drawn by politicians who'd never held a rifle. He'd survived Shiloh, Antietam, Gettysburg, survived the field hospitals where men screamed for mothers who would never come, survived the long march home to find his family's farm burned, his parents dead, his sister married off to a shopkeeper in Philadelphia who looked at Colton like he was a ghost that had forgotten to stay buried. So he drifted west, following the sunset until the land ran out and there was nothing left but desert and sky and blessed, terrible emptiness. Out here, no one asked questions. No one wanted stories. You could be whoever you claimed to be, and as long as you paid for your whiskey and kept your mouth shut, the world left you alone. Exactly what he needed. He was checking his trapline when he found her, a routine he'd maintained for 3 years, working the narrow ravines where javelina and coyote sometimes wandered. The traps hadn't caught anything in a week, which wasn't surprising. Game was scarce this time of year, driven deep into the hills by the heat. He almost missed her entirely. It was only the buzzards that caught his attention, 6 of them circling a spot about 100 yards off his usual route. Buzzards meant a kill, and a kill meant fresh meat if he got there before the scavengers did. Deer, maybe. Or a young steer stupid enough to wander into rough country. He guided his horse down the rocky slope, rifle loose across his saddle, scanning for threats. The desert had taught him to be careful. Rattlesnakes liked to sun themselves on warm rocks. Mountain lions waited in the shadows. And occasionally, men with less than honorable intentions thought a lone rancher might be carrying something worth stealing. But when he reached the bottom of the ravine and saw what the buzzards were circling, he stopped dead. Not a deer, not a steer, a woman, or what was left of one. She lay in a twisted heap against the base of a boulder, covered in dust and dried blood, so still that for a moment he was certain she was already dead. Buzzards hopped closer, heads cocked, evaluating. Ants swarmed across her legs. No, across where her legs should have been. Jesus Christ, Colton breathed. He swung down from his horse, boots hitting the ground hard. The buzzards scattered, flapping into the air with indignant cries. He approached slowly, rifle ready, unsure what he was dealing with. Bandits sometimes left bodies as warnings. Sometimes fights went bad and people crawled off to die. Sometimes... He stopped 3 feet away and just stared. She was native. That much was obvious from her clothing, traditional leatherwork, though torn and blood-stained beyond recognition. Her face was turned toward the rock, hair matted with dirt and sweat. Her right leg ended in a cauterized stump just below the knee, the wound black and crusted. The left was worse, a mangled ruin that infection had already claimed, swollen and dark with rot. No one survived injuries like that. Not out here. Not without a doctor and medicine and pure stupid luck. And yet, her chest moved. Barely. A shallow rise and fall so faint he almost missed it. "Son of a bitch," Colton muttered. "You're still alive." He knelt beside her, setting the rifle down within easy reach. Old habits. Even dying, people could be dangerous. He'd seen men with their guts hanging out draw knives and fight. Seen soldiers with shattered spines somehow find the strength for one last shot. But this woman didn't move, didn't react when he touched her shoulder. Her skin burned with fever, radiating heat like stones left too long in the sun. He should leave her. The smart play, the sane play, was to put a bullet in her head and end her suffering. It's what he'd want if he were in her place. Quick, clean, merciful. His hand moved toward his pistol. Hesitated. Why? What the hell did it matter to him if some stranger died hard or easy? He didn't know her, didn't owe her anything. Whatever had happened, whatever fight or ambush or disaster had left her broken in this ravine, it wasn't his concern. And yet, he'd spent 3 years convincing himself he didn't care about anything, that he'd carved out all the parts of himself that felt connection or responsibility or whatever you wanted to call that weakness that made men sacrifice themselves for strangers. But looking at her now, this woman who'd been left to rot like garbage, who'd somehow clung to life through days of agony with nothing but sheer stubborn refusal to give death an easy victory, something shifted in his chest. Something he'd thought was dead. "God damn it," he said softly. He stood, made his decision. Moving quickly now, he grabbed his canteen and a spare blanket from his saddlebag. He needed to stabilize her for transport. If he threw her across his saddle like this, the ride would kill her. Gently, he rolled her onto her back. She made a sound then, a low moan of pain that barely qualified as conscious. Her eyes flickered but didn't open. Up close, he could see how young she was. Mid-20s, maybe. Younger than him. Her features were strong, high cheekbones, a straight nose, lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. There was a livid bruise across her temple where she'd hit the rock, and smaller cuts everywhere. But those would heal. The legs, though. He forced himself to look, to assess with the cold pragmatism he'd learned in field hospitals where sentiment killed as surely as infection. The right stump was actually not bad. Clean amputation, the bleeding stopped, signs of early healing. Someone had tried to cauterize it, probably using a heated blade. Crude, brutal, but effective. The left was a disaster. The bone protruded through torn flesh, fragments of shrapnel still embedded in the muscle. The entire lower leg was swollen to twice its normal size, mottled with the dark purple-black of advanced gangrene. The stench was overpowering even through the other smells of blood and sweat. That leg had to come off, soon, or the infection would spread to her blood and kill her anyway. But first he had to get her home. He wet a cloth with water from his canteen and cleaned her face, wiped the worst of the dirt from her neck and arms. Then he fashioned a makeshift stretcher from his blanket and 2 sturdy branches he cut from a dead mesquite, lashing them together with rope. Every movement was careful, deliberate. The woman was barely holding on, and rough handling would finish what the wounds had started. It took 20 minutes to secure her to the stretcher and another 10 to figure out how to attach it to his horse without causing her more pain. The gelding, to his credit, stood patient through the whole process, as if he understood the gravity of the situation. Finally, Colton mounted up, leading the horse carefully through the ravine. Every rock, every uneven patch of ground made the stretcher jolt, and each jolt pulled another soft cry from the woman's throat. Unconscious or not, her body knew it was suffering. "I know," Colton said, though she couldn't hear him. "I know it hurts. Just hang on." The ride back to the ranch took 3 hours. 3 hours of brutal Arizona sun, 3 hours of watching the woman's breathing grow more shallow, 3 hours of wondering if he was dragging a corpse home or something that might actually survive. When his small house finally came into view, Weathered boards, crooked chimney, the well with its rusty pump. Relief washed through him, despite everything. He got her inside, laying the stretcher on his table. The house was sparse, one room serving as kitchen, bedroom, and everything else. A wood stove, a narrow cot, shelves with canned goods and ammunition, the accumulated debris of a solitary life. He lit every lamp he had, boiled water on the stove, and laid out his tools. A saw from his woodshed, his sharpest knife, gut thread for sutures, whiskey for sterilization and pain, a leather strap for her to bite down on. Then he stood over her, looking at the infected leg, and felt his stomach turn. He'd done field amputations during the war, held men down while surgeons cut. Once, when the surgeon was killed by artillery, he'd done it himself, taken a leg off a boy from Ohio who'd stepped on a landmine. The boy had survived, though Colton still had nightmares about his screaming. "You better live," he told the unconscious woman, "because if you die after I do this, I'm going to be real upset." He gave her a small dose of laudanum, not enough to help much, but all he could spare, and tied her arms to the table. Then he positioned himself, said a prayer to a deity he didn't believe in, and began to cut. The woman didn't wake up for 4 days. Colton kept vigil by her side, changing her bandages, trickling water into her mouth, watching for signs of infection in the fresh amputation site. The fever raged, pulling her in and out of delirium. She spoke in her sleep, words in her own language that he couldn't understand, names and pleas in what sounded like songs. Sometimes she thrashed, fighting invisible enemies, and he had to hold her down to keep her from tearing the stitches. Sometimes she went so still he had to put his hand on her chest to make sure she was still breathing. On the third night, he thought he'd lost her. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, her pulse thready and weak. He sat beside the bed. He'd moved her there from the table and watched death creep closer, filling the room with its cold presence. "Come on," he said quietly. "You didn't survive 4 days in that ravine just to quit now." But she kept sinking, slipping away toward whatever darkness waited. Without thinking, Colton reached out and took her hand, small and calloused from work he could only imagine. He held it gently, feeling the heat of fever, the fragile bones beneath the skin. "Stay," he heard himself say. "Just stay." He wasn't sure who he was talking to, her, himself, the ghosts that haunted his sleep. But whether she heard him or not, something shifted. Her breathing steadied. The color in her face improved slightly. She didn't wake, but she stopped sinking. By morning, the fever had broken. Colton fell asleep in his chair, her hand still in his, too exhausted to move. Tim. When Ayla finally clawed her way back to consciousness, the first thing she noticed was the ceiling. It was made of rough-hewn planks, darkened by smoke and age, with gaps where sunlight filtered through in golden bars. Not the sky, not the rocks of the ravine. A ceiling, which meant walls, which meant shelter, which meant she wasn't dead. The realization came slowly, filtering through layers of fog and pain. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Her entire body felt like it had been beaten with clubs, every muscle screaming in protest. And her legs. Memory crashed back in a sickening wave. The cannon, the blast, the blood. Her people leaving, the days of waiting, and then nothing. A blank space where her death should have been. She forced her eyes open fully, blinking against the light. The room was small and spare, furnished with the bare minimum: a stove, a table, shelves, a single chair. A man sat in that chair beside her bed, slumped forward with his head on his arms, asleep. A white man. Tall, lean, weathered by sun and hard living. Dark hair shot through with early gray. Several days' worth of beard. Clothes worn and practical. Work shirt, denim pants, scuffed boots. He looked exhausted. Shadows under his eyes, lines of fatigue etched into his face. Ayla stared at him, trying to make sense of this. Why was she in a white man's house? Who was he? What did he want? And most importantly, where were her weapons? She tried to sit up, and this time the pain was so intense it forced a gasp from her throat. The sound woke the man instantly. He straightened, eyes snapping open, hand moving automatically toward the pistol on his belt before he seemed to remember where he was. Their eyes met. His were gray-blue, like winter sky, and they widened slightly when he realized she was awake. "Easy," he said, voice rough from sleep. Don't try to move too fast. Ayla didn't respond. Couldn't. Her throat was too dry, her tongue thick and useless. She kept staring at him, trying to read threat or intention in his face. The man seemed to understand. He stood slowly, hands visible and empty, and moved to pour water from a pitcher into a tin cup. He brought it to her carefully, as if approaching a wounded animal. "You need a drink," he said. "You've been out for 4 days." 4 days. He held the cup to her lips, tilting it gently. The water was cool and clean, and Ayla drank greedily despite every instinct screaming not to accept anything from this stranger. When the cup was empty, he refilled it and let her drink again. "Better?" he asked. She managed a small nod. "Can you speak?" Ayla worked her jaw, testing. "Yes." Her voice came out as barely more than a rasp, but it was there. She could speak, could think, was alive against all odds and logic. "Good." The man set the cup aside and sat back down, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm Colton Vance. This is my ranch." Ayla said nothing, just watched him with eyes that had seen men lie before. Colton seemed to expect this. "I found you in a ravine about 5 miles east of here. You were in bad shape. Still are, truth be told. I brought you back, patched you up as best I could." "Why?" The question came out flat, accusatory. Because it made no sense. White men didn't save tribal people out of kindness. They killed them, drove them away, claimed bounties on their scalps. They didn't nurse them through fevers and risk infection and waste supplies on strangers. Colton was quiet for a moment, as if considering the question himself. "Honestly?" He rubbed his face with one hand. "I don't know, I should have left you. Would have been smarter, but I didn't. So here we are." It wasn't an answer, but it was honest enough that Ayla almost believed it. She looked down at herself for the first time since waking. Someone had dressed her in a too large shirt, his probably, and covered her with a blanket. The shape under that blanket told a story she already knew but hadn't wanted to confirm. Both legs. Still gone. The right one ending in a neatly bandaged stump. The left. She pulled the blanket back despite Colton's noise of protest. The left leg was also gone now. Cut clean above where the infection had started, wrapped in fresh white cloth that was only slightly stained with blood and seepage. He'd amputated. While she was unconscious and helpless, this stranger had cut off what remained of her leg. Rage flooded through her, hot, clean, overwhelming. She tried to lunge at him, to reach him with her hands if nothing else, but her body betrayed her. She barely managed to lift her arms before weakness sent her collapsing back onto the mattress, gasping. You had no—" "I saved your life," Colton said, and there was steel in his voice now. "That leg was rotting. The infection was already spreading to your blood. You would have been dead in another day if I hadn't taken it. So yes, I had every right, because you were dying, and I was the only one there to stop it. You should have let me die." Probably. The simple agreement took the wind from her rage. She stared at him, this stranger who'd saved her life without asking permission, and felt something crack in her chest. "I wanted to die," she said quietly. "I was ready." "I know." Colton's voice softened. "But you don't get to anymore. You're alive now. So you can hate me for it, scream at me, whatever you need to do. But you're alive, and that means something." "What?" Ayla demanded. "What does it mean? I can't walk, can't run, can't fight. I'm useless, a burden. I should have died in that ravine with my honor intact." "There's no honor in dying because someone else decided you weren't worth saving." Colton leaned forward, holding her gaze. "Your people left you. That's on them. But you didn't quit, even when quitting would have been easier. That's on you. And now you've got a choice. You can give up, or you can figure out how to live with what you've got left." "Easy for you to say. You have your legs." "Yeah, I do. And I've got a working ranch, a well that barely produces, and ghosts that won't let me sleep. We've all got our crosses to bear." Despite everything, Ayla felt her lips twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. This man was strange, blunt, and somehow against all her expectations, not pitying her. That mattered more than she wanted to admit. She closed her eyes, suddenly exhausted again despite having just woken. "I don't know how." "How to what?" "Live like this." Colton was quiet for a moment, then, "Neither do I. But I figure we'll work it out as we go." We. As if this was something they'd face together. As if he wasn't planning to dump her at the nearest town or military post as soon as she was stable enough to move. Ayla opened her eyes and studied him again. Really looked this time. Saw the scars on his hands, the old injury and the way he held his left shoulder, the haunted quality in his eyes that spoke of things witnessed and survived. This was a man who understood pain, who'd fought his own battles with death and loss. Maybe he did understand. A little. "How long?" she asked. "How long what?" "Until I can move on my own." Colton shrugged. "Depends. The wounds need time to heal. Another week, maybe 2, before you can sit up without tearing stitches. After that..." He trailed off, clearly not sure himself. "I won't be a burden," Ayla said firmly. "I'll work. Earn my keep. You can barely lift your arms. I'll get stronger." Something shifted in Colton's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "You're serious?" "I don't beg. I don't take charity. If I'm going to live, I live on my terms." A slow smile crossed Colton's face, the first real expression of warmth she'd seen from him. "All right then. We'll see what you're made of." He stood, stretched, bones popping. "For now, you need to rest. Get your strength back. There'll be time enough for stubbornness later." As he turned to leave, Ayla spoke again. "Colton." He paused, looking back. "Thank you." The words cost her something to say, pride maybe, or the last vestiges of the warrior she'd been. But they needed saying. Colton nodded slowly. "Don't thank me yet. Living's harder than dying. You might end up cursing me before this is done." Then he was gone, leaving Ayla alone with the sunlight filtering through the ceiling cracks and the impossible reality of her survival. She was alive, broken, diminished, forever changed, but alive. Now she just had to figure out what that meant. The days blurred together in a haze of pain, frustration, and slow, grinding progress. Colton kept his distance at first, giving Ayla space to process everything that had happened. He brought her food, simple fare, beans and cornbread, and occasionally rabbit stew and water, changed her bandages with practiced efficiency, and otherwise left her to her thoughts. She hated it. Hated lying helpless in his bed while he slept on the floor. Hated the way her body refused to cooperate, every movement sending shocks of agony through her stumps. Hated the dependence, the vulnerability, the complete loss of control. Most of all, she hated the pity she sometimes saw in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. On the 5th day of consciousness, she decided enough was enough. Colton had gone outside to tend his animals, leaving her alone in the house. Ayla waited until his footsteps faded, then pushed herself upright with her arms. The movement sent fire racing through her core and legs. Phantom legs, she was learning. Her mind still expected them to be there. Still sent signals that ended in amputation stumps and screaming nerve endings. But she gritted her teeth and kept going. Sitting up took 5 minutes. The room spun, and she had to pause, breathing hard, fighting nausea. When it passed, she looked down at what remained of her legs. The bandages were clean, changed that morning. The stumps themselves were healing. Colton had done good work, better than she'd expected from a cowboy with no medical training. But they were still raw, still tender, still utterly useless for what she needed them to do. She needed to stand, to move, to prove she wasn't just dead weight. Ayla shifted to the edge of the bed, let her stumps dangle over the side. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through her, but she'd learned to breathe through it, to let it wash over and past rather than fighting it. The floor was maybe 3 feet below, an impossible distance. She braced her hands on the mattress and pushed off, trying to balance on what remained of her legs. She lasted maybe half a second before her stumps buckled and she crashed to the floor in a heap, crying out despite her best efforts to stay silent. The door slammed open. Colton stood there, eyes wide with alarm. "What the hell are you doing?" "Trying to stand," Ayla ground out through clenched teeth. "Stand? You can't..." He stopped, seeming to realize the futility of that statement. Of course she couldn't stand. That was exactly the problem. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her. "You're going to tear your stitches open. You need to..." "What?" Ayla snapped. Lie in that bed forever. Wait for you to carry me around like an infant? I was going to say heal first, then we'll figure out the rest. I'm done healing. I'm done waiting. She tried to push herself up again, but her arms were shaking from the effort and she couldn't get the leverage. Frustrated tears burned in her eyes, tears she refused to let fall. I need to move. Colton was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, he said, "What if I could help with that?" Ayla looked at him sharply. "How?" "I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it." "Tell me." He seemed to debate with himself, then nodded. "Let me get you back in bed first. Then I'll show you." An hour later, Colton returned carrying something he'd built in his workshop, a crude platform made from scrap wood, about 2 feet square, with 4 wheels salvaged from an old furniture dolly bolted to the bottom. Leather straps hung from the sides. He set it on the floor beside the bed where Ayla watched with narrow-eyed suspicion. "What is that?" "Your freedom," Colton said. "If you want it." He explained the concept as he adjusted the straps. The platform would sit under her, supporting her weight. The straps would secure around her waist and thighs, keeping her stable. And the wheels would let her move using her arms, pushing against the floor, propelling herself forward. "It's not perfect," he admitted. "Rough as hell, actually. But it'll get you mobile again. Let you move around without help." Ayla stared at the contraption, emotions warring in her chest. It was crude, ugly, a constant reminder of everything she'd lost. It was also possibility. "Help me onto it," she said. Colton did, lifting her carefully from the bed and settling her onto the platform. The straps took some adjusting, too tight, and they cut off circulation, too loose and she'd slide off. But finally they found the right configuration. Ayla sat there, elevated off the ground by maybe 6 inches, wheels beneath her, and felt something she hadn't felt since waking up in this house. Control. She placed her palms flat on the floor and pushed. The platform rolled backward about a foot before stopping. She pushed again, harder this time. The platform moved forward, wheels squeaking. It was awkward, difficult, nothing like walking. But it was movement. Self-directed, self-powered movement. Ayla pushed again and again, learning the balance, the rhythm. After a few minutes, she'd crossed half the room. Her arms burned with effort, sweat dampening her borrowed shirt, but she didn't stop. Colton watched from the doorway, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. When she finally paused to rest, breathing hard, he said quietly, "Not bad for a first try." Ayla looked up at him, and for the first time since waking in his house, she smiled, small, tentative, but real. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for everything." Colton shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "You said you wanted to earn your keep. Can't do that if you can't move. Now you can." He turned to leave, then paused. "Just don't overdo it. Those stumps still need to heal." "I'll be careful." "You won't. But at least pretend when I'm watching." And despite everything, the pain, the loss, the uncertain future, Ayla found herself laughing. It felt like resurrection. The platform became Ayla's world. Every morning, before the sun climbed high enough to turn the house into an oven, she strapped herself onto it and pushed. Down the length of the room, back again, around the table, through the narrow doorway onto the porch. Each journey measured in feet and inches, each movement a small victory against the body that had betrayed her. Colton watched from a distance, pretending not to notice when she gritted her teeth against the pain, when sweat soaked through her shirt, when her arms shook so badly she had to stop and rest. He went about his work, mending fences, tending the scraggly cattle, hauling water from the well, and said nothing about the determined woman who refused to accept limitation. But he noticed. He always noticed. By the end of the first week, Ayla could navigate the entire interior of the house without assistance. By the second week, she'd ventured outside, rolling across the hard-packed earth of the yard, feeling the sun on her face and the wind in her hair for the first time since the ravine. It felt like flying. "You're going to wear those wheels down to nothing," Colton observed one afternoon, leaning against the porch rail while Ayla circled the water trough for the 3rd time. His tone was dry, but there was something else underneath it. Approval, maybe, or respect. "Then you'll build me new ones," Ayla shot back, not slowing her pace. "Will I now?" "You built these. You can build more." Colton snorted, but he was smiling. Bossy for someone living on charity. Ayla stopped, fixing him with a sharp look. I told you I don't take charity. Put me to work. Doing what? You can barely... I can use my hands, my brain. Give me something useful to do, or I'll find it myself. They stared at each other for a long moment, wills clashing in the desert heat. Finally, Colton pushed off from the rail and walked to his workshop, a lean-to shed attached to the side of the house where he kept his tools. He emerged carrying a tangle of leather straps and metal buckles. My tack needs mending, he said, dumping the pile beside where Ayla sat on her platform. Bridle's worn through, saddle needs new stitching. You know leather work? Ayla picked up a bridle, examining the worn places where the leather had cracked and split. My father was a craftsman. He taught me. Then prove it. It was a challenge, and they both knew it, a test to see if her pride was backed by skill or just stubbornness. Ayla took the challenge without hesitation. She spent the rest of that day working on the tack, her fingers remembering skills she hadn't used in years. Colton brought her his tools, awls, needles, waxed thread, a small knife for cutting, and watched as she methodically took apart the damaged pieces, trimmed away the ruined sections, and began the slow process of repair. Her hands were steady, her stitches were tight and even. By sunset, she'd finished 2 bridles and started on the saddle. Colton picked up one of the finished pieces, testing the repair with a critical eye. The leather was supple where she'd conditioned it, the stitching nearly invisible, the whole thing stronger than it had been originally. Well? Ayla asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. It'll do, Colton said gruffly. But that night, when he thought she was asleep, Ayla heard him telling his horse about the finest leatherwork he'd seen since leaving Kentucky. She smiled in the darkness and let him think she hadn't heard. Over the following weeks, a routine emerged. Colton would rise before dawn, tend to the animals and the land, then return to find Ayla already working, repairing equipment, organizing supplies, doing whatever task she could manage from her platform. They'd eat breakfast together in companionable silence, then go their separate ways until evening. At night, they'd sit on the porch while the desert cooled, sharing the day's small triumphs and frustrations. Colton talked about his plans for the ranch, a bigger well, more cattle, maybe some chickens if he could keep the coyotes away. Ayla spoke less, but when she did, she told him about her people, not the recent tragedy, but the good memories. Harvest festivals, hunting trips with her father, her mother's songs. They were both careful not to ask too many questions. The past was a minefield neither wanted to navigate, but slowly, inevitably, trust began to build. It happened in small moments, Colton leaving his rifle within her reach without thinking twice about it, Ayla accepting food from his hands without checking it for poison first. The way they developed a shorthand, half-finished sentences and knowing looks that communicated more than words. 3 weeks after Ayla had woken in his house, Colton came back from town with supplies and news. There's talk, he said, unloading flour and coffee onto the kitchen table. His voice was carefully neutral, but Ayla heard the tension underneath. She looked up from the shirt she was mending. What kind of talk? The cavalry's still hunting. There was a raid 3 weeks back. Tribal warriors hit a supply convoy, killed 2 soldiers. Captain Merrick's put a bounty out, $500 for information leading to the capture of any surviving warriors. Ayla's hand stilled on the fabric. 500. That's a lot of money out here, enough to make men look twice at strangers. Did anyone ask about me? Colton shook his head. No one knows you're here. I've kept to myself. That's nothing new. But... He paused, choosing his words carefully. We need to be careful. If someone comes around asking questions, I'll hide. Ayla, I'll hide. She repeated more firmly. I won't let them take me, and I won't let them hang you for harboring a fugitive. Colton set down the sack of flour with more force than necessary. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about what they'd do to you if they found you. Then we make sure they don't find me. The determination in her voice left no room for argument. Colton studied her face, the hard set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes, and nodded slowly. All right, but we're going to need a plan. They spent the evening working out contingencies. If riders approached, Ayla would hide in the root cellar, a small space beneath the kitchen floor that Colton had dug for storing vegetables. It was cramped and dark. but it was hidden. The entrance was covered by a heavy rug, and the table, invisible unless you knew where to look. They practiced it twice. Colton would give a specific whistle, and Ayla would drop whatever she was doing, roll to the cellar entrance, slide down, and pull the cover back into place. The first time took her almost 2 minutes, too long. The second time, she did it in 45 seconds. Faster, Colton said. I'm going as fast as I can. Not fast enough. If they're already in the yard, you need to disappear before they reach the door. Ayla gritted her teeth and tried again, this time 30 seconds. Better, Colton allowed, but keep practicing. She did. Every day, multiple times until the movement became automatic. Hear the whistle, drop the work, roll to the cellar, disappear. Her arms grew stronger from the constant motion, her balance more sure. The platform that had seemed so awkward at first became an extension of her body, and all the while the tension grew. Every time Colton went to town, he came back with more news, more sightings, more patrols. The cavalry was tightening the net, searching every homestead and ranch within 50 miles of the last known tribal camp. It was only a matter of time before they came. The visit happened on a Tuesday morning in late May. Ayla was outside, working on a new bridle in the shade of the porch, when Colton's whistle cut through the air, sharp and urgent. She didn't hesitate, dropped the leather, spun her platform toward the door, and rolled inside. Across the floor to the rug, shoved the table aside with strength born of practice and desperation, pulled up the cellar cover, slid down into the darkness, and yanked the cover back into place just as she heard the thunder of hoofbeats in the yard. In the cellar, Ayla held her breath and listened, Colton's voice calm and unhurried. "Gentlemen, something I can help you with?" A different voice, clipped and authoritative. "Colton Vance?" "That's right." "I'm Lieutenant Hewitt, United States Cavalry. We're conducting a search of all properties in this area. Under authority of Captain Merrick, I'm required to inspect your premises." "Search for what?" "Hostile Indians. There's been a raid. I heard about that in town. Terrible business." "Indeed. So you'll understand our need to be thorough." Ayla pressed her ear to the cellar cover, heart hammering. Above her she heard footsteps, multiple sets entering the house, boots on the wooden floor, the scrape of furniture being moved, doors opening and closing. "You live alone out here?" Hewitt asked. "Just me and the horses," Colton replied. "Suits me fine." "Lonely life." "I like the quiet." More footsteps. They were moving through the house systematically, checking every corner. Ayla held perfectly still in the darkness, barely breathing, aware that any sound could betray her. "You see any Indians in these parts?" Hewitt's voice was closer now, probably standing right above the cellar. "Not in months. They know better than to come around a man with a rifle." "You sympathetic to their cause?" There was a pause. When Colton spoke again, his voice had an edge. "I'm sympathetic to being left alone. Don't care much about causes, theirs or yours." "Careful, Mr. Vance. That kind of talk could be seen as what? A man wanting to work his land in peace?" Colton's tone hardened. "I fought for this country, Lieutenant. Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh. I've given enough. Now I just want to raise cattle and mind my own business. That a crime?" Another pause, and then Hewitt's voice, slightly mollified. No, of course not. We're just doing our duty." "Then do it and move on. I've got work." More footsteps. The sound of the table being shifted. Ayla's breath caught, but then it settled back into place. They were checking, but not thoroughly enough to find the hidden entrance. "All right," Hewitt said finally. "Everything seems in order here. But if you do see anything suspicious, Indians, strangers, anyone who doesn't belong, you're required to report it to the nearest garrison." "Understood. There's a reward, $500. That's a lot of money for a rancher." "I'll keep that in mind." The footsteps retreated. Ayla heard the soldiers mount up, heard Hewitt give orders, heard the horses move out. But she didn't move. Not yet. Colton had drilled it into her. Wait for the all-clear signal. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Finally, 3 soft knocks on the floor above her head. Ayla pushed the cover up and emerged from the cellar, blinking in the sudden light. Colton was standing by the window, watching the dust trail of the departing soldiers. "They're gone," he said without turning around. Ayla rolled to the window and looked out. The yard was empty, the horizon clear, but her hands were shaking. "That was too close." "Yeah." Colton's jaw was tight. "And they'll be back. Hewitt's thorough. He'll remember this place, remember me. If he hears even a whisper of something suspicious, then we make sure he doesn't hear anything." Colton finally looked at her. "You understand what this means? You can't go outside during the day anymore. Can't be seen. One person catches a glimpse of you, word gets out, and they'll come with dogs and a full company." "I understand." "Ayla, you could be trapped here for months, maybe longer. Are you—" "I'm alive because you made a choice," Ayla said quietly. "Now I'm making one. I stay hidden, I stay careful, and I stay alive." The certainty in her voice seemed to reassure him. Colton nodded slowly. "All right, then we adjust." From that day forward, Ayla became a ghost. She worked inside the house or in the root cellar, emerging only after dark when the desert was too black for anyone to see movement. Colton brought her everything she needed: materials for her leather work, food, water, news from town. It should have felt like a prison. Instead, it felt like preparation. Because Ayla wasn't just hiding, she was planning. She'd learned the rhythms of Colton's ranch, understood the weak points and the strengths. She knew where he kept his weapons, how many rounds of ammunition he had, which boards in the floor creaked and which were silent. She memorized the approach routes to the house, the places where attackers would have cover, the lines of sight from the windows. And she began to make herself ready. "Teach me to shoot," she said one night. Colton looked up from the saddle he was oiling. "You know how to shoot." "I knew how to shoot standing up, with 2 legs for balance. That's not an option anymore. I need to learn again." He studied her for a moment, then stood and retrieved his rifle from above the door. He brought it to her along with a box of cartridges. "Tomorrow night," he said, "we'll go out to the ravine where no one can hear. I'll show you." They went out after midnight when the world was reduced to starlight and shadow. Colton set up targets, old bottles and cans, at varying distances. Then he showed Ayla how to brace the rifle while sitting on her platform, how to compensate for the different angle, how to control her breathing and squeeze the trigger. The first shot went wide, the recoil nearly knocking her backward. The second was closer. By the 10th, she was hitting the targets more often than missing them. "You're a natural," Colton said, genuine admiration in his voice. "I'm angry," Ayla corrected. "Anger makes a steady hand." They practiced 3 nights a week after that. Rifle first, then pistol. Ayla learned to reload in the dark, to clear jams, to shoot from different positions. Her accuracy improved until she could hit a can at 50 yards in moonlight. Colton brought her knives too, and they worked on throwing techniques. The platform actually gave her an advantage: a stable base, a consistent release point. Soon she could put a blade into a post from 20 feet with deadly precision. "You're building an arsenal," Colton observed. "I'm making sure I'm never helpless again." He understood that. Understood it in a way that needed no explanation, but the weapons weren't the only preparation. Ayla also began studying the land around the ranch, memorizing every detail from Colton's descriptions and her own nighttime observations, the ravines and washes that could provide cover, the rock formations that offered high ground, the water sources and game trails. She was mapping the battlefield, preparing for a war she hoped would never come. The summer heat arrived like a hammer, turning the desert into a furnace. Colton's well began to run dry, forcing him to haul water from a spring 5 miles away. It was brutal work, and Ayla hated watching him do it alone while she hid inside. "Let me help," she said one evening as he returned exhausted and soaked with sweat. "How? You can't ride out there." "No, but I can manage things here. The animals need less water if they're in shade during the hottest part of the day. I can rig coverings, redirect the runoff from the roof into barrels. There are ways to conserve." Colton looked skeptical, but he was too tired to argue. "Show me." Over the next week, Ayla transformed the ranch's water usage. She built shade structures for the cattle using salvaged wood and canvas. She dug channels to catch every drop of rain or runoff. She even devised a system using wet burlap over the windows to cool the house without wasting water. The results were undeniable. Within days, Colton's trips to the spring decreased from daily to every 3 days. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked, watching her adjust one of the shade structures from her platform. "My people lived in the desert for generations. We learned to work with the land, not against it." She paused, then added quietly, "We had to. It was the only way to survive." That night, sitting on the porch in the relative cool of evening, Colton said, "Tell me about them. Your people." Ayla was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, she began to speak. She told him about her childhood in the high country, where the air was thin and pine trees grew in twisted shapes. About learning to track deer with her father, to gather roots with her mother, to fight with her brothers. About the stories the elders told around winter fires, tales of coyote and raven, of heroes and monsters, of the time when animals could speak and the world was young. She told him about the first time she'd seen white soldiers, when she was 12, how they'd ridden into camp demanding tribute, and how her father had stood up to them, calm and dignified, until they rode away. "He wasn't afraid of them," Ayla said. "He told me fear was a choice. You could choose to be controlled by it, or you could choose to face it. He always chose to face it." "What happened to him?" "Killed, 3 years ago. There was a dispute over grazing land. The cavalry said we were trespassing. My father said we'd been there for 1,000 years. They shot him to prove their point." Colton's hands tightened on the porch rail. "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry, but sorry doesn't bring anyone back." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the coyotes yip in the distance. Finally, Ayla asked, "What about you? You said you fought in the war. Which side?" "Union, Pennsylvania Regiment." "Why?" Colton snorted. "Because I was young and stupid and thought I understood what I was fighting for. Freedom, they said. Preserving the nation. Noble causes." He shook his head. "Turned out I was just another body feeding the machine. Rich men arguing over money and power while poor men died in the mud." "But you survived. You." "Some days I'm not sure that's the right word for it." He looked at his hands, scarred, weathered, marked by violence. "I came back. But a lot of me stayed in those fields, the parts that knew how to hope, how to trust, how to believe anything mattered. And yet you saved me." "Yeah. Apparently there's still some stupid left in me." Ayla smiled despite herself. "Not stupid, human. Maybe." Colton stood, stretched. "I'm turning in. Don't stay up too late." "Colton?" He paused at the door. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded and disappeared inside, leaving Ayla alone with the stars and the desert wind and the strange, fragile thing growing between them. Not quite friendship, not quite something else, but real enough that it filled the empty spaces neither had known they carried. The raid came in August, but not on Colton's ranch. News filtered through from town. A homestead 30 miles north had been hit. The family killed, the buildings burned, the livestock scattered. The cavalry was calling it retaliation by tribal warriors, though some folks whispered it might have been bandits using the situation for cover. Either way, the territory was on edge. Colton came back from town grim-faced and silent. He unloaded supplies with sharp, angry movements that spoke of barely contained tension. "How bad?" Ayla asked. "Bad enough. Woman and 3 kids, all dead. Husband, too, when he tried to defend them." Colton slammed a sack of flour onto the table. "Merrick's using it to justify a full sweep. Every ranch, every farm, every dwelling within 100 miles. They're going house to house." "When will they get here?" "Week, maybe less." Ayla felt cold despite the heat. "The cellar won't be enough. Not if they're doing a full search." "I know." "Then what do we do?" Colton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but heavy with decision. "We make you disappear completely. Not just hidden, gone." He spent the next 2 days building a false wall in the back of the root cellar, creating a space barely large enough for a person to crouch in. He stocked it with water, dried food, a blanket, and a knife. It was cramped and airless and completely invisible if you didn't know to look for the slight gap in the boards. "If they search the cellar, you go in here," Colton explained. "Don't come out until I give the all clear, even if it takes hours." "What if they find you helping me? They'll hang you." "They have to prove it first, and I'm a good liar." "Colton, This isn't up for debate, Ayla. You stay hidden, you stay alive. That's all that matters. But his eyes told a different story. This wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about something neither of them wanted to name, but both felt every time they sat together in the evening, every time their hands brushed passing tools, every time they shared the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed words to communicate. The cavalry arrived on a Thursday. Ayla was already in the hidden space when the first shout rang out in the yard. She pressed her eye to a crack between boards and watched through the cellar opening as boots thundered across the floor above. There were more of them this time. A full squad, maybe 15 men, led by a captain whose voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Mr. Vance, I'm Captain Merrick. I believe you know why we're here." Ayla's blood ran cold. Merrick, the man who'd ordered the cannon fire that had destroyed her life. "I do," Colton's voice replied, steady and unconcerned. "Same as last time. You want to search my property." "That's correct. And this time, we'll be thorough. Be my guest. I've got nothing to hide." "We'll see about that." For the next hour, Ayla listened to them tear the house apart. Mattresses flipped, floorboards tested. The table moved. She heard it scrape directly over the cellar entrance. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure they'd hear it. Then footsteps on the cellar stairs. A soldier climbed down, lantern in hand. Ayla held her breath, pressing back into the tiny space behind the false wall. The light swept across the cellar, over the stored vegetables, the empty barrels, the walls, and passed right by the hidden gap. "Nothing down here, sir," the soldier called up. "Check it thoroughly." More sounds of searching. Barrels moved, vegetables disturbed. But the soldier was looking for a person, not a secret compartment. After 10 minutes, he climbed back up. "It's clear, Captain." "You're certain?" "Unless they can turn invisible, sir." Footsteps above again, conversation she couldn't quite make out. Then Merrick's voice, closer now. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Mr. Vance. Have you seen any tribal Indians in this area?" "No." "Any strangers passing through? People who didn't belong?" "No." "You're aware there's a survivor from the engagement 3 months ago? A woman, wounded but dangerous. Information suggests she may have taken refuge in this region." Ayla's breath stopped. "Haven't seen any wounded women," Colton said, "tribal or otherwise." "You're sure? Because harboring a fugitive is a hanging offense." "I'm aware of the law, Captain, and I'm telling you, there's no one here but me." The silence stretched. Ayla could almost feel Merrick's suspicion, his calculation. He knew something, or thought he did. "Search the outbuildings," Merrick ordered finally, "and check the perimeter. If anyone's been here, there'll be signs." More footsteps, the sound of soldiers spreading out. Ayla waited in the darkness, muscles cramping, sweat running down her face, barely daring to breathe. It took another hour before they gave up. "We'll be back," Merrick told Colton. "And if I find out you've been lying to me, you won't, because I'm not." Finally, the boots mounted up and rode away. Ayla waited. The sun set. Stars came out. Still she waited, until 3 soft knocks on the cellar floor told her it was safe. She crawled out of the hidden space, every muscle screaming, and pushed up through the cellar entrance. Colton was waiting, his face drawn with tension. "They're gone," he said. "But Merrick's suspicious. He'll have someone watching the ranch." Ayla pulled herself onto her platform, shaking with reaction. "How long?" "Indefinitely. He's patient, methodical. He'll wait for you to make a mistake." "Then I won't make one." Colton knelt beside her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not for himself, for her. "Ayla, maybe we should consider—" "No. You don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to suggest I leave, find somewhere safer, and the answer is no." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not running anymore. This is where I make my stand. It could get us both killed. Then we die on our own terms." She reached out, placed her hand on his. "Together." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Colton's hand turned, gripping hers. "Together," he echoed quietly. And in that moment, everything changed. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. find resources. The hand-holding lasted only a moment before Colton pulled away, standing abruptly and moving to the window. But the connection remained, invisible and undeniable, changing the air between them. Neither spoke about it. Instead, they fell into a new routine built on heightened vigilance and unspoken awareness. Colton checked the perimeter every morning and evening, looking for signs of watchers. Ayla stayed inside during daylight hours, working by the windows where she could see anyone approaching long before they reached the house. And at night, when the world belonged to shadows and secrets, they sat together and talked about everything except the thing that mattered most. 3 days after Merrick's visit, Colton spotted the watcher. He was perched on a ridge about half a mile east, partly concealed behind rocks, but visible if you knew where to look. A soldier in civilian clothes, trying to blend in but failing. He had a spyglass and enough provisions to suggest a long stay. "They're serious," Colton said quietly, lowering his own field glasses. Ayla rolled to the window beside him and studied the distant figure. "How long will they watch?" "Until they're satisfied there's nothing to find. Or until they get bored. Could be days. Could be weeks." "Can he see inside the house?" "Not clearly, but he'll see movement, shadows. If you're not careful." "I'm always careful." Colton glanced at her, and something in his expression made her pause. "What?" "You can't live like this forever, trapped inside, hiding every time someone rides by. That's not living, Ayla. That's just surviving. Surviving is all I've ever done." "That's not true. You've done more in the past 2 months than most people do in years. You've rebuilt yourself, learned to move, to work, to fight. You've turned this ranch from barely functional to actually profitable. He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "You've made this place feel less empty." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. Ayla felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "Colton, I'm just saying," he continued quickly, looking away, "you deserve better than hiding in cellars and watching your back every second. You deserve to live without fear." "And what about you? Don't you deserve the same thing?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I stopped deserving things a long time ago." "That's not for you to decide." "Then who decides?" "You." There was an edge in his voice now, defensive walls going up. "You don't know what I've done. The things I did in the war, I know you saved my life when you had every reason not to. I know you've risked everything to keep me safe. I know you're a better man than you think you are." Ayla moved closer, her platform wheels squeaking softly on the floorboards. "Whatever you did back then, you've more than made up for it." Colton turned to face her, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes stole her breath. "Have I? Because most nights I still see their faces. Boys I killed, men I watched die, and I wonder if any of this," he gestured around the house, at her, at everything, "makes up for any of that. It doesn't work that way. You can't balance scales with blood and mercy. All you can do is choose who you are right now, in this moment. And right now, you're someone who makes me believe survival is worth the effort." The words came out fiercer than she'd intended, but she meant everyone. Colton stared at her, something working in his jaw. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "You make me believe it too." The moment stretched, fragile and electric. Ayla's heart hammered against her ribs. Colton's hand moved, almost reaching for her. A gunshot cracked in the distance. They both froze. Colton grabbed his rifle and moved to the window in one fluid motion, scanning the horizon. Another shot, then shouting, faint but unmistakable. "What is it?" Ayla whispered. "Don't know. Sounds like it's coming from the watcher's position." He watched for another few seconds, then his posture changed. "There. Someone's riding hard toward him. Cavalry? Can't tell. Too much dust." He lowered the rifle slightly. Could be a relief shift. Could be trouble. They waited, tense and silent, as the distant commotion played out, more shouting, the sound of horses moving fast. Then, abruptly, nothing. Colton kept watch for another 20 minutes before relaxing slightly. "They're gone, both of them." "The watcher too?" "Yeah, rode off together, heading north. Something must have happened. An emergency maybe, or new orders." Ayla felt relief wash through her, but she kept it contained. Could be a trick. Draw us out. See if we relax our guard. That's what I'd do if I was Merrick. Colton set the rifle aside but stayed by the window. We keep to the routine. Nothing changes. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. The interrupted moment hung between them like unfinished business, impossible to ignore and too dangerous to acknowledge. That night, neither of them slept well. The watcher didn't return the next day or the day after. By the end of the week, Colton confirmed through careful scouting that the ridge was abandoned. Whatever had called the soldier away had been important enough to pull him from surveillance duty. Could be a trap, Ayla said when he reported back. Could be. Or could be we got lucky. Colton poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to her. Either way, we stay sharp. Always. They drank in companionable silence, sitting at the table as afternoon light slanted through the windows. The heat was oppressive even with the makeshift cooling system Ayla had rigged, but they'd both grown accustomed to it. I need to go to town tomorrow, Colton said eventually. We're low on supplies and I need to pick up some lumber for the fence repairs. Ayla's hands tightened on her cup. Colton going to town always meant risk, questions, scrutiny, the chance someone would notice something off about him. Be careful. Always am. He met her eyes. You'll be all right here alone? I'm not helpless. I know, that's not what I asked. The distinction mattered. He wasn't questioning her capability, just checking on her comfort. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes about how well he'd learned to understand her. I'll be fine, Ayla said more gently. Just don't take any chances. If Merrick or his men are there, I know how to avoid trouble. Trouble has a way of finding you whether you look for it or not. Colton smiled slightly. Is that wisdom from your elders? That's wisdom from watching you for 2 months. He laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and Ayla felt that dangerous warmth bloom in her chest again. She looked away, focusing on her coffee, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her like that. Colton left before dawn the next morning, taking the wagon and his most docile horse. He'd be gone most of the day. The trip to town and back was 6 hours, even without accounting for the time needed to load supplies and handle business. Ayla watched him go from the window, then set about her own work. She'd been planning modifications to the platform, ways to make it more stable and maneuverable. The current design worked, but it could be better, faster, more responsive. She gathered tools from Colton's workshop and spread them across the floor, studying the platform's construction. The wheels were the limiting factor. They were designed for furniture, not for bearing weight across rough terrain. If she could find larger wheels, something with better traction. She was so absorbed in the work that she almost missed the sound of approaching horses. Almost. The rhythm was wrong. Too many horses moving too fast. Not Colton returning early, not a casual rider passing through. Trouble. Ayla moved with the speed of long practice, rolling to the cellar entrance and dropping down just as the horses thundered into the yard. She pulled the cover into place and pressed her eye to a crack, watching. 4 riders. Not cavalry. These men wore dusty civilian clothes and carried themselves with the loose confidence of people used to taking what they wanted. Bounty hunters, most likely, or bandits using the chaos to their advantage. The lead rider dismounted and kicked the door open without bothering to knock. "Anyone home?" he called, voice rough and mocking. Silence. The riders spread out, searching the house with brutal efficiency. Ayla heard them overturning furniture, breaking dishes, laughing at their own destruction. One of them found Colton's hidden whiskey and passed it around, taking long swigs. "Nothing here," one of them said. "Waste of time." "Check everything," the leader ordered. "That rancher's hiding something. I can smell it." They tore through the house for another 10 minutes before one of them noticed the cellar door. "Down here," he called. Footsteps on the stairs. Lantern light flooding the darkness. Ayla held absolutely still in her hidden space behind the false wall, barely breathing, fingers wrapped around the knife Colton had left her. If they found her, she'd take at least one of them with her before they finished it. The bounty hunter, a heavy-set man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, moved through the cellar methodically. Unlike the cavalry soldier who'd searched before, this man was thorough. He tested the walls, checking for hollow sounds. moved barrels, examined every shadow. His hand reached toward the false wall, paused. "Anything?" the leader called from upstairs. The scarred man stared directly at the gap where Ayla watched, his eyes narrowing. She could see him thinking, calculating. He'd found something, or thought he had. "Nah," he said finally, turning away. "Just vegetables and spiders." He climbed back up, leaving Ayla weak with relief and confusion. He'd seen the wall, had to have. So why hadn't he exposed it? Upstairs, the men argued briefly about whether to wait for the rancher to return. The leader wanted to, but the others were getting restless. Finally, they compromised. 2 would stay hidden in the hills to watch. The others would move on to check neighboring properties. "If he comes back with anyone suspicious, we move in. Dead or alive, the bounty pays the same." They rode out, leaving the house in shambles. Ayla waited a full hour before emerging from the cellar, and even then she moved with extreme caution. The place was destroyed, table overturned, supplies scattered, Colton's few possessions rifled through and discarded. His hidden whiskey was gone, as were several other valuables. But they hadn't found her. And more importantly, they'd left 2 men watching. She had to warn Colton before he rode into an ambush. The problem was simple. She couldn't leave the house without being seen, and she had no way to send a message. Colton would return by the main road, completely unaware of the danger waiting for him, unless she created a different danger. Ayla's mind raced through possibilities, discarding options as fast as she thought of them. She couldn't ride. Even if she could get to the horses without being seen, she couldn't mount or control one from her platform. She couldn't run, couldn't even walk. But she could shoot. The plan formed quickly, born of desperation and the cold calculation of someone who'd already faced death, and decided it wasn't worth fearing. She gathered every weapon in the house, Colton's rifles, the pistols, her throwing knives. Loaded everything, checked the actions, laid them out within easy reach. Then she positioned herself at the window with the best view of the approach road and the hills where the watchers were hidden. And she waited. The sun climbed toward noon. Heat shimmered off the desert floor. Ayla's arms ached from holding position, but she didn't move. Finally, in the distance, dust rose on the road. A wagon, moving steadily toward the ranch. Colton. In the hills, she saw movement, the watchers positioning themselves for the ambush. One carried a rifle, the other a shotgun. They were spreading out, planning to catch him in a crossfire when he reached the yard. Ayla took a breath, steadied her aim, and fired. The shot cracked across the desert, kicking up dust 10 feet in front of the lead watcher. Both men dove for cover, confused and scrambling. On the road, Colton's wagon stopped immediately. Even from a distance, Ayla could see him grab his rifle and scan for threats. She fired again, this time at the second watcher's position. The man returned fire blindly, his shots going wide and high. Now Colton understood. He whipped the wagon around and drove hard for cover behind a rock formation, disappearing from the watcher's line of sight. The bounty hunters broke from their positions, running for their horses. They'd lost the element of surprise and knew it. As they mounted up, Ayla fired twice more. Not trying to hit them, just keeping them moving, denying them time to set up another ambush. They rode off fast, heading in the opposite direction from Colton. Ayla lowered the rifle, hands shaking with reaction. She'd done it, warned him, driven off the threat, bought them both time. But now Colton was trapped behind those rocks, unable to approach the house safely without knowing if more ambushers were waiting. She needed to signal him that it was clear. Thinking quickly, Ayla tied a white cloth to a broomstick and wedged it out the window, waving it back and forth. The universal signal of truce, of safety. After several long minutes, she saw movement. Colton emerged from cover cautiously, rifle ready, eyes scanning the hills. When he spotted the white flag, he paused, then slowly guided the wagon toward the house. He came in fast, pulling the wagon right up to the porch. Before the horses had fully stopped, he was inside, rifle sweeping the room until he found Ayla at the window. "What happened?" he demanded. She told him everything. The bounty hunters, the destroyed house, the ambush. He listened with growing tension, jaw tight. "They could come back," he said when she finished. "With more men. I know. We need to leave, tonight. Pack what we can and get as far from here as go." "No." Colton stared at her. Ayla, we can't defend this place against a hunting party. It's too exposed, too isolated. If they come back in force, then we make them regret it. She met his eyes steadily. I'm done running, Colton. Done hiding. This is our ground now, and I say we hold it. Oh, our ground? The possessive pronoun hung between them, heavy with implication. Yes, Ayla said firmly. Ours. Unless you disagree? Colton set down his rifle slowly, something shifting in his expression. No, I don't disagree. Then we prepare, we fortify, we make this place into something they can't take without paying for it in blood. She could see him warring with himself, the part that wanted to protect her at all costs versus the part that understood she wasn't someone who could be protected, only stood beside. Finally, he nodded. All right, we make our stand here, together. There was that word again. Together. It had become their anchor, the thing that defined everything else. They spent the rest of the day cleaning up the destruction and planning their defense. Colton knew military tactics from his war years, and Ayla understood ambush and guerrilla fighting from growing up in hostile territory. Between them, they created a strategy that played to their strengths and the ranch's natural advantages. They reinforced the door and windows with heavy shutters that could be barred from inside. They created firing positions that offered cover while providing clear lines of sight to all approaches. They stockpiled ammunition, water, and food in the cellar in case of siege. And they set traps. Colton showed Ayla how to rig tripwires using fishing line and old cans filled with pebbles, primitive but effective early warning systems. They dug shallow pits along the most likely approach routes, covering them with brush. Not deep enough to seriously injure a horse, but enough to slow riders and create chaos. If they come at night, Colton explained, positioning another tripwire, they'll be moving careful, trying to stay quiet. These will make noise, give away their position. And if they come during the day, then they're confident, probably in numbers. We'll need to hit them hard and fast, make them think twice about the cost. He tied off the wire and stood, wiping sweat from his forehead. But our best defense is making sure they don't know you're here. As long as they think I'm alone, they might hesitate. Or they might just kill you and search at their leisure. Cheerful thought. Realistic thought. Colton smiled despite the tension. When did you get so bloodthirsty? When I decided I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Something in her tone made him pause. He looked at her fully, seeing not the broken woman he'd found in the ravine, but the warrior she'd forged herself into, scarred, adapted, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the legs she'd lost. You know what? He said quietly. I think those bounty hunters have no idea what they're walking into. Good. Let's keep it that way. They worked until sunset, then beyond, using lantern light to finish the preparations. By the time they stopped, exhausted and sweat-soaked, the ranch had been transformed into a fortress. They sat on the porch in the cooling dark, sharing water and the last of some bread Colton had brought from town. The stars emerged, brilliant and countless in the clear desert sky. You ever think about what comes after? Ayla asked. After what? After all this, the running, the hiding, the fighting, after we've survived whatever's coming. What then? Colton was quiet for a long time. Honestly, I stopped thinking past tomorrow a long time ago. Seemed pointless when tomorrow might not come. And now? He looked at her, and in the starlight his eyes were impossibly gentle. Now I think maybe tomorrow's worth planning for. If we survive it. We will. You sound certain. I am. Ayla shifted on her platform, turning to face him more fully. Because I have something to survive for now. This place, this life we're building, you. The admission came easier than she'd expected. Maybe because it was dark, or maybe because they'd both been dancing around the truth for weeks, and she was tired of pretending it didn't exist. Colton's breath caught. Ayla, I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why it doesn't make sense. I'm tribal, you're white. I'm hunted, you're risking everything by hiding me. I can't even walk for... She stopped herself, swallowing hard. But none of that changes how I feel. How do you feel? She met his eyes steadily. Like I found something I didn't know I was looking for. Like this, you and me, this place, is worth fighting for. Worth dying for, if it comes to that. Colton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand cupped her face with a gentleness that made her chest ache. You're not dying, he said fiercely. Not if I have anything to say about it. And what you're feeling... He paused, seeming to gather courage. I feel it too. Have for weeks. Maybe since I first found you and couldn't make myself walk away. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't think I had the right. You didn't choose this. Being here, being stuck with me. I brought you here, made decisions for you when you couldn't make them yourself. How could I ask for anything more? You're not asking, I'm offering. Ayla placed her hand over his, holding it against her face. This is my choice, Colton. You. Us. Whatever that means. He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to stop him. She didn't. Their lips met softly, tentatively, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Well, Colton said, voice rough. That complicates things. Ayla laughed, surprised by the sound. Everything's already complicated. What's one more thing? Fair point. They sat there for a while longer, hands intertwined, listening to the desert night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The wind whispered through the rocks. And for the first time since the ravine, since the cannon blast that had torn her life apart, Ayla felt something like peace. It didn't last. The next morning, Colton rode out to check the traps and scout the perimeter. He'd been gone maybe an hour when Ayla heard horses approaching. She moved to her position immediately, rifle ready, watching through a crack in the shutters. 3 riders this time. But not bounty hunters. Cavalry. And at the lead, sitting tall in his saddle with cold calculation in his ice-blue eyes, was Captain Merrick. Ayla's blood turned to ice. Of all the people who could have come, Merrick was the worst. He was smart, patient, and utterly ruthless. And he knew, somehow he knew, that she was here. The riders stopped in the yard. Merrick dismounted with deliberate slowness, scanning the house with the practiced eye of someone who'd raided 1,000 similar properties. Mr. Vance, he called. I know you're here. Come out, please. We need to talk. Silence. Merrick waited patiently for a full minute, then nodded to his men. They dismounted and began to spread out, moving to surround the house. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, Merrick continued, voice carrying clearly. Easy way, you come out and answer some questions. Hard way, we burn you out. Your choice. Ayla's mind raced. Where was Colton? How far had he ridden? Would he see the soldiers and stay away, or would he come charging back to defend her? And what should she do? Hide in the cellar and hope they gave up? Or make her stand here now while she had the advantage of fortification? Merrick walked closer to the house, boots crunching on gravel. I'm going to tell you what I think happened, Mr. Vance. I think you found something in the desert. Someone, rather. A woman from the tribal band we engaged 3 months ago. I think you brought her here, patched her up, and have been hiding her ever since. He paused at the base of the porch steps. Now, I'll grant you might have had good intentions. Maybe you thought you were saving a life. But that woman is a fugitive and a threat to the safety of this territory. By harboring her, you've made yourself an accomplice to her crimes. Another pause. When he spoke again, his voice had gone cold. I'm giving you one chance to make this right. Bring her out, and we'll show leniency. Keep hiding her, and you both hang. In the silence that followed, Ayla heard the soft creak of wood, one of Merrick's soldiers stepping onto the porch. Her decision crystallized in that instant. She wasn't hiding anymore. Wasn't waiting to be found like prey in a den. If Merrick wanted her, he'd have to take her, and she'd make damn sure he paid for it. Ayla rolled to the door and threw it open, rifle leveled at Merrick's chest. You want me, Captain? She said clearly. Here I am. Merrick's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of surprise he showed. Then his hand moved toward his pistol. Don't, Ayla warned. I'm faster than I look, and this rifle doesn't miss. Merrick froze, calculating. His soldiers had weapons drawn, but no clear shot. Ayla had positioned herself so the doorframe provided cover while keeping Merrick in her sights. "So you are here," Merrick said slowly. "The survivor. I have to say, I'm impressed you made it this far." "Save your admiration. Tell your men to back off." "I don't think so. You're outnumbered and surrounded. The only question is whether we take you alive or dead." "Third option," a new voice said from behind the soldiers. "You leave. Now." Everyone turned. Colton stood at the edge of the yard, rifle aimed at the nearest soldier. He must have circled around when he spotted the cavalry, coming in from the blind side. "Mr. Vance," Merrick said, "how good of you to join us. Get off my property." "Can't do that. You're harboring a fugitive." "She's not a fugitive. She's a survivor, and she's under my protection." Merrick's expression hardened. "That's not your decision to make." "It is on my land." The standoff held, 4 armed people with weapons trained on each other, everyone waiting for someone else to make the first move. Finally, Merrick smiled, a cold, calculating expression. "You're willing to die for her? A woman you barely know?" "I know her well enough," Colton said evenly. "And yeah, I am." Touching, truly. Merrick's hand moved fractionally toward his weapon, but ultimately pointless. Everything happened at once. Merrick drew. Ayla fired. The soldiers scattered. Colton dove for cover and returned fire. Merrick's shot went wide as Ayla's bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him back. He stumbled, cursing, and his men opened fire in earnest. Ayla rolled back inside and slammed the door, bullets splintering the wood above her head. She moved to the window, found a soldier taking position behind the water trough, and put a round through the trough that sent him scrambling. Outside, Colton had taken cover behind his wagon and was trading shots with the other soldier. The man had good cover behind a rock pile, and neither could get a clean shot. Then Colton did something crazy. He lit the kerosene lamp he'd left in the wagon bed and threw it. The lamp exploded against the rocks in a ball of flame. The soldier screamed and ran, clothes on fire. Colton's next shot took him in the leg, and he went down hard. That left Merrick. The captain had taken cover behind his horse, using the animal as a shield. Ayla could see him through the window, evaluating options, bleeding from the shoulder but far from defeated. "This doesn't end well for you," he called. "More troops are coming. You can't fight the whole army." "Don't need to fight the whole army," Colton shouted back. "Just you." "Then come out and face me like a man." Ayla rolled to the door. "Don't," she told Colton through the gap. "He's trying to bait you." "I know, but he's right. If we don't end this now, more will come." "So we wait them out. We have supplies, water, and how long before he burns the house down around us?" Colton met her eyes through the cracked door. "Trust me, I know how to handle this." Before she could stop him, he stood and walked into the open, hands empty and raised. "All right, Merrick, you want to talk?" "Let's talk." Merrick emerged from behind his horse, pistol trained on Colton. "Smart choice. Now call the woman out." "Can't do that?" "Then this conversation is over." Merrick's finger tightened on the trigger. "Wait." Colton took a step forward. "You want her because she's a survivor of that engagement, right? Proof that your people didn't finish the job? She's a hostile combatant. She's a woman with no legs who can barely move without help. What threat is she to anyone?" Merrick's jaw tightened. The law says you need proof she committed a crime. Can you prove that?" "She was part of the raiding party. She was part of a community trying to survive, but even if she was a warrior, she can't fight anymore. Can't raid, can't even walk. So what's the point of dragging her in?" Merrick was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The point is justice. The point is revenge, and you and I both know it." Colton took another step forward, close enough now that Ayla could see sweat on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "How many tribal people have you killed, Captain? How many villages burned? At what point does it become enough?" "When they stop fighting." "She has stopped, permanently, so let her go." "I can't do that. I have my orders." "Then change them. You're the ranking officer. You have discretion." Merrick's pistol wavered slightly. For just a moment, Ayla saw something in his face. Not doubt, exactly, but consideration. He was listening. Then his expression hardened again. "No, she comes with me. Dead or alive, but she comes." He raised his pistol, aiming past Colton at the doorway where Ayla watched. Colton moved. He was fast, faster than a man his size should be, closing the distance and grabbing Merrick's gun hand before the shot could fire. They struggled, grappling, both fighting for control of the weapon. The pistol went off between them. Both men staggered back. For a terrible moment, Ayla couldn't tell who'd been hit. Then she saw the blood spreading across Colton's side, dark and wet, and her world narrowed to a single point of absolute clarity. Merrick had shot him. Merrick was going to die. She raised her rifle with hands steady as stone and fired. The shot took Merrick in the chest. He looked down at the spreading red stain, then up at Ayla with something like surprise. Then he fell, hitting the ground hard and not moving again. Ayla was already rolling forward, pushing through the door and across the yard to where Colton had collapsed. She reached him as he pressed a hand to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "How bad?" she demanded, pulling his hand away to see the wound. "I've had worse." His voice was strained but steady. The bullet had gone clean through just above his hip, painful and bleeding heavily, but if they could stop the bleeding and prevent infection, not fatal. "Can you move?" "Yeah, help me up." Together they got him back to the house. Ayla's platform made the process awkward, but determination and adrenaline carried them through. Once inside, she barred the door and guided him to the bed. "The soldiers," Colton gasped. "One's dead, one's wounded and running. Let him go. We need to deal with this." She grabbed her medical supplies, the same ones he'd used on her months ago, and began cutting away his shirt. The entry and exit wounds were clean, which was good, but he was losing blood fast. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Just do it." She worked quickly, cleaning the wounds with whiskey, packing them with clean cloth, binding everything tight. Colton gritted his teeth through the whole process, making no sound beyond harsh breathing. When she finished, his face was gray and sweat-soaked, but the bleeding had slowed. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "We're even now." "Colton, Merrick is dead. I killed him. When the army finds out, we'll deal with it." He gripped her hand weakly. "Together, right?" Despite everything, the blood, the danger, the impossible situation they'd just made infinitely worse, Ayla smiled. "Together," she echoed. Outside, the sun climbed higher, indifferent to the violence and the choices, and the two people who'd decided that some things were worth dying for, and some things were worth fighting to live. The wounded soldier didn't get far. Ayla found him an hour later, collapsed behind the well with his leg shattered and bleeding. He looked up at her with terrified eyes as she approached on her platform, rifle across her lap. "Please," he gasped. I was just following orders." "Shut up." Ayla studied him dispassionately. He was young, maybe 20, with a soft face that suggested he'd grown up far from here. Some farm boy who'd joined up for steady pay and adventure. "How many others are coming?" "I don't know. Captain Merrick was supposed to report back by noon. When he doesn't, they'll send a patrol to investigate." "How many?" "Full company, maybe. 30 men." The soldier's face had gone gray with pain and blood loss. "Please, I need a doctor." "You need to make a choice." Ayla leaned forward, holding his gaze. "You tell me everything you know about the Army's plans, patrol schedules, search grids, where they're concentrating forces, and I'll patch you up, give you water, and let you crawl away from here. Or you keep quiet, and I leave you for the buzzards. Your call." The soldier stared at her, seeing something in her eyes that made his decision immediate. "I'll talk. I'll tell you everything." And he did. Between gasps of pain, he laid out the cavalry's entire operation. The search had expanded to cover 100 square miles, with particular focus on isolated ranches where someone could hide a fugitive. Merrick had been convinced someone was harboring the survivor from the cannon engagement, and he'd been systematically investigating every property. "He was obsessed," the soldier said. "Said it was personal. Said he never left loose ends." "Well, he won't have to worry about that anymore," Ayla said coldly. She kept her word, though. She cleaned and bound his leg, roughly, but well enough to keep him from bleeding out, and left him water. Then she rolled back to the house, leaving him to figure out his own salvation. Colton was sitting up when she returned, his face still pale, but his eyes clearer. "You should be resting," Ayla said. "Can't rest. We need to move the bodies before they start to smell." He tried to stand, winced, and sat back down hard. I'll handle it. Ayla, you can't. Watch me. It took her 3 hours and every ounce of strength she possessed, but Ayla managed to drag Merrick's body and the dead soldier to a ravine half a mile from the house. She covered them with rocks, not out of respect but pragmatism. Leaving bodies in the open would draw attention. Then she spent another hour erasing tracks, covering bloodstains with fresh dirt, and generally making the yard look like nothing unusual had happened. By the time she finished, the sun was setting and her arms felt like dead weight. She rolled back inside to find Colton watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked. "You're incredible. You know that?" Ayla felt heat rise to her face that had nothing to do with exertion. "I'm practical. There's a difference." "Is there?" Colton shifted carefully on the bed, making room. "Come here." She hesitated, suddenly aware of how she must look. Filthy, sweat-stained, covered in dust and probably blood. But Colton's expression was patient and open, so she rolled closer. When she was within reach, he took her hand and pulled gently. Ayla understood. She shifted from her platform onto the bed beside him, settling carefully to avoid jostling his wound. "We killed a cavalry captain," she said quietly, "and one of his soldiers. When the army finds out, they'll come looking for revenge." Colton's voice was matter-of-fact. "I know. This isn't what you signed up for when you pulled me out of that ravine." "I didn't sign up for anything. I made a choice." He turned his head to look at her. "Same as you did today. You could have hidden, let Merrick and me fight it out. Instead, you stood with me." "Of course I did." "There's no of course about it. You chose me over safety, over any chance of clemency or mercy from the army. That means something." Ayla was quiet for a moment. "What do we do now?" "We prepare for the worst and hope for the best." Colton squeezed her hand. "When that patrol comes, and it will come, we need to be ready. But first, I need to heal enough to stand without falling over." "How long will that take?" "Few days, maybe a week. Bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. I've recovered from worse. In a field hospital with actual doctors, maybe. Not in the middle of nowhere with me as your only help. You've done fine so far. Better than fine." He smiled slightly. "Though I have to say, your bedside manner could use work." Despite everything, Ayla laughed. "You want me to be gentle, fluff your pillows, and bring you tea? That would be terrifying. Please don't." They fell into silence, listening to the desert wind and the settling of the house. Colton's thumb traced slow circles on the back of her hand, an unconscious gesture that sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Ayla," he said eventually, "when this is over, if we survive it, what do you want?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what kind of life do you see for yourself? Because I'll be honest, I've been thinking about it, about what comes after." He paused. "And I keep seeing you in it." Ayla's breath caught. "Colton, let me finish. I'm not good at this. Talking about feelings, making plans. Spent too many years just surviving day to day. But you've changed that. Made me think there might be something worth building toward." He turned to face her fully despite the pain it caused. "So I'm asking, what do you want?" She thought about it, really considered the question instead of deflecting. What did she want? Not what she'd lost, her legs, her people, her old life. Not what circumstances had forced on her, but what she actually, genuinely wanted for herself. "I want this," she said finally. "This place, this life, you. I want to wake up every morning and know I'm exactly where I chose to be, not where I was driven or abandoned or left to die. I want to work this land and make it thrive. I want to stand beside you." She gestured at her missing legs, a wry smile on her face, metaphorically speaking, "and build something that's ours. Not just yours, not just mine. Ours." Colton's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "You're sure? Because there's no taking it back once you claim something. It's yours forever." "I'm sure." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I've never been more sure of anything." "Then that's what we'll do. Survive this, and then we build." He kissed her softly, carefully, as if she were something precious. "Together." "Together," Ayla echoed against his lips. They stayed like that for a long while, finding comfort in closeness and the simple fact of each other's presence. Outside, the stars emerged in their ancient patterns, indifferent witnesses to the small dramas of human survival and connection. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state between peace and anticipation. Colton recovered with the resilience of someone who'd survived worse, and Ayla maintained constant vigilance, watching the horizon for dust trails that would signal approaching riders. None came. Maybe the soldier didn't make it back, Colton suggested on the third evening. Or maybe they're planning something bigger. Ayla didn't take her eyes from the window. Merrick was important. When he doesn't return, they won't send a small patrol. They'll send overwhelming force. You sound certain. I've seen how the army operates. They don't like being embarrassed. And having a captain killed by a disabled tribal woman and a lone rancher, that's more than embarrassing. It's humiliating. Colton absorbed this. So we're looking at what? A full company? More? At least. And they won't come in blind like Merrick did. They'll scout, observe, wait for the perfect moment to strike. Then we make sure there is no perfect moment. Colton stood carefully, testing his mobility. The wound still hurt. She could see it in the tension around his eyes, but he was functional again. We stay ready, 24 hours a day if we have to. They refined their defensive preparations, adding new elements based on what they'd learned from the first encounter. Ayla rigged a mirror system that let them see the approach from multiple angles without exposing themselves at windows. Colton reinforced the door and shutters with metal brackets salvaged from old farm equipment. They created multiple fallback positions inside the house, each with its own supply cache and firing angles. And they talked. Long conversations in the quiet hours, sharing pieces of themselves they'd never shown anyone else. Ayla told him about her mother's death in childbirth and how she'd raised her younger siblings until they were old enough to care for themselves. Colton spoke about the nightmares that still woke him some nights, dreams of drowning in mud while cannons roared and men screamed. Does it ever stop? Ayla asked. The dreams? I don't know. They've gotten better since you arrived. He looked at her with surprising vulnerability. Having someone to wake up to helps. I get nightmares too. About the ravine, the waiting. Sometimes I dream I'm still there, and all of this, she gestured around the house, is just a fever dream before I die. It's not. You're here. We both are. Colton reached out, taking her hand. And we're going to stay that way. On the morning of the fourth day, their vigilance paid off. Ayla spotted the dust first, a thick cloud on the eastern horizon, too large to be a small group. She whistled sharply, the signal they had established, and Colton was at the window in seconds. How many? He asked. Can't tell yet, but that's a lot of horses. Ayla grabbed her rifle and moved to her position. This is it. Could be a cattle drive or a merchant caravan. You believe that? No. Colton checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. But a man can hope. The dust cloud grew closer over the next hour, resolving gradually into distinct shapes. Riders, many of them. Ayla counted at least 40, possibly more, moving in organized formation that screamed military discipline. They're not hiding their approach, she observed. They want us to see them coming. Psychological warfare. Make us sweat, maybe panic and run. Colton's jaw tightened. Standard siege tactics. The cavalry stopped about a quarter-mile out, just beyond rifle range. They set up camp with efficient precision. Tents, picket lines for horses, cooking fires, making it clear they weren't going anywhere. A single rider detached from the group and approached under a white flag. He stopped 50 yards from the house and called out, Colton Vance, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, commanding officer of Fort McDaniel. I'm here to discuss the death of Captain Merrick and the circumstances surrounding it. I request a parley under flag of truce. Colton and Ayla exchanged glances. Could be a trap, Ayla said quietly. Probably is, but we need to know what we're dealing with. Colton moved to the door, opening it just enough to call back. I'm willing to talk, Colonel, but my terms. You come alone, unarmed, and you stay on that side of the yard. I'll talk from here. A pause. Then, agreed. Harrison dismounted and walked forward slowly, hands visible and empty. He was older than Merrick had been, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades on the frontier. When he reached the agreed-upon spot, he stopped and looked directly at the house. "Mr. Vance, I'm going to be direct. Captain Merrick was an officer in the United States Army, and he's dead on your property. That makes you either a witness or a suspect." "Which is it?" "Witness," Colton called back. "Self-defense. He drew on me first." "And the tribal woman he was searching for? The one who survived the engagement 3 months ago?" Silence. Harrison continued. "I'll take that as confirmation she's here. Now, under normal circumstances, I'd have to arrest you both and let a court sort it out. But these aren't normal circumstances." "What does that mean?" "It means Captain Merrick was operating outside his authority when he came here. He had no warrant, no legal grounds for searching your property. And while I don't approve of the Army's officers being killed, I also don't approve of them conducting personal vendettas on government time." This was unexpected. Ayla rolled closer to hear better, staying out of sight but near enough to catch every word. "So what are you saying, Colonel?" Colton asked carefully. "I'm saying there might be a way to resolve this without more bloodshed, but it requires honesty from you." Harrison's voice was measured, almost reasonable. "Is the woman here? Is she alive?" Colton hesitated. This was the moment where everything could go very wrong, very fast. "Don't," Ayla whispered. "Don't give me up." But Colton had made his choice. "Yes, she's here, and she's under my protection." Harrison nodded slowly. "I need to see her. Need to confirm she's the person Merrick was searching for." "Why?" "Because if she is, and if she's willing to answer some questions, I might be able to convince my superiors that continuing this hunt is a waste of resources." "I don't trust you." "Smart man. You shouldn't." Harrison shifted his weight, looking tired. "But consider this. I've got 40 armed soldiers out there. If I wanted to take this place by force, I would have already started. The fact that I'm standing here talking instead of burning you out should tell you something." Ayla moved to the door, making her decision. Colton turned, surprise and concern warring on his face. "What are you doing?" he hissed. "Ending this, one way or another." She pushed the door open wider and rolled out onto the porch. Harrison's eyes widened when he saw her, specifically when he saw the platform, the missing legs, the reality of what she'd survived. "So it's true," he said quietly. "You lost both legs in the engagement." "I prefer to think I survived despite losing them." Ayla's voice was steady, challenging. "What questions do you have, Colonel?" Harrison seemed to gather himself. "First, your name." "Ayla Redhawk." "You were part of the group that Captain Merrick's forces engaged on March 20th? "I was with my people when they were attacked, yes." "Were you armed?" "I had a rifle. I was covering the retreat of our elders and children." "Did you fire on American soldiers?" Ayla met his eyes. "I defended my people from an unprovoked attack. If that's a crime, then yes, I'm guilty." Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Miss Redhawk, I'm going to be honest with you. There are people in the territorial government who want to make examples. They want to prove that resistance is futile, that anyone who stands against expansion will be crushed." He paused. "But there are also people, myself included, who recognize that this conflict has gone on too long and cost too many lives on both sides." "What's your point?" "My point is that you're not a threat anymore. You can't fight, can't flee, can barely move without assistance. Dragging you to trial would be purely symbolic, and symbols have a way of becoming martyrs." He looked between her and Colton. "So here's what I'm proposing. You answer my questions truthfully, give me information about your people's movements and leadership, and in exchange, I write in my report that you died of your wounds. The hunt ends. You get to live your life here quietly without the army breathing down your neck." "In exchange for betraying my people," Ayla said flatly. "In exchange for information that might prevent further bloodshed. Your people are scattered, hunted, running out of places to hide. The war is over, Miss Redhawk. All that's left is deciding how many more die before everyone accepts that." Ayla felt rage building in her chest. Hot, clean, familiar. "You want me to help you finish what Merrick started. I want you to help me end it with as few additional casualties as possible. By selling out everyone I've ever known. By accepting reality. Harrison's voice hardened slightly. Your people can't win. They never could. The only question is whether they die fighting or find a way to survive. And survival requires compromise. Easy for you to say from the winning side. You think I like this? You think I enjoy watching communities destroyed and cultures erased? Harrison shook his head. I've been doing this for 30 years, Miss Redhawk. I've seen more death than you can imagine, and I'm tired of it. So yes, I'm asking you to compromise, to choose life over pride. Is that so terrible? Ayla looked at Colton, saw the tension in his face, the way his hand hovered near his rifle. He would support whatever choice she made, even if it meant fighting impossible odds. But what was the point? Her people were gone, scattered to the wind. The few who'd survived would be adapting, finding new ways to live in a world that no longer had space for their old ways. Information she gave wouldn't change that. It might actually save lives if Harrison was being honest about preventing further conflict. And yet, no, she said quietly. Harrison's expression tightened. Miss Redhawk, I won't help you hunt them. I won't trade names for safety. You want to end the conflict? Then stop hunting people who are just trying to survive. Her voice gained strength. You say you're tired of death? Then stop causing it. Declare amnesty. Offer real peace, not surrender. Give people a reason to stop fighting besides exhaustion and despair. That's not my decision to make. Then find someone whose decision it is, because I'm not betraying my people, no matter what you offer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with consequence. Finally, Harrison nodded slowly. I respect that. Truly I do. But it leaves me with a problem, which is, I have 40 men who expect me to resolve this situation. I can't go back empty-handed and tell them we're just walking away. So take me, Ayla said. I killed Merrick. I shot him when he was fighting Colton. That's the truth. Arrest me, try me, hang me if that's what it takes. But leave him alone. No, Colton said sharply. That's not happening. Colton, no. We already made our choice, together, remember? He stepped forward, standing beside her. You want someone to blame for Merrick's death? Blame me. I'm the one who hit her. I'm the one who defended her. And I'm the one who'll keep defending her, even if it means fighting every last one of your soldiers. Harrison looked at them both, a disabled tribal woman and a scarred rancher standing together against impossible odds, and something in his expression shifted. You love her, he said, not a question but a statement. Yes, Colton said without hesitation. And you love him? Ayla felt her throat tighten. Yes. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, seeming to wrestle with himself. Then he sighed heavily. All right. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to write in my report that I investigated the death of Captain Merrick and found evidence of a legitimate self-defense situation. I'm going to note that the tribal woman he was searching for died of her wounds before my arrival, and that her body was disposed of according to local custom. And I'm going to strongly recommend that this matter be closed and no further action taken against Mr. Colton Vance. Ayla stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I've spent 30 years watching good people die for bad reasons, and I'm tired of it. Because you two remind me of what I'm supposedly fighting to protect, people's right to build lives on their own terms. And because, he paused, because Captain Merrick was my friend, and I knew him well enough to know he'd lost perspective on this hunt. He let it become personal, and it got him killed. That's on him, not you. Your superiors won't question it? Colton asked skeptically. They might, but I'm 3 months from retirement and my record is exemplary. They'll grumble, but they'll accept it. Harrison straightened. However, this protection only extends so far. You keep your heads down, don't cause trouble, and don't give anyone reason to look twice at you. Can you do that? Yes, Ayla said firmly. Then we have an understanding. Harrison turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. If anyone asks, and they might, you never saw me here. I never offered you this deal. As far as anyone knows, I conducted my investigation from a distance and concluded it wasn't worth pursuing further. Understood. Harrison nodded and walked back to his horse. Within the hour, the entire cavalry unit had broken camp and ridden away, leaving nothing but hoofprints and empty space. Ayla and Colton stood on the porch, watching them disappear into the distance, neither quite believing what had just happened. "Did we just get away with it?" Ayla asked. "Looks like." Colton put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him. "Don't think I'm comfortable with how easily that happened, but I'll take it." "Me too." They stayed there for a long time, watching the horizon, waiting for the trap to spring or the trick to reveal itself. But the desert remained quiet, empty of everything except wind and sun and possibility. Finally, Colton said, "So, what now?" Ayla smiled. "Now we live, build that life we talked about, see if we're any good at normal." "I've never been good at normal." "Neither have I. We'll figure it out together." "Together," Colton agreed. And for the first time since the ravine, since the cannon blast and the abandonment and all the pain that had followed, Ayla felt something she'd thought was lost forever. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of someone waiting to die, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd chosen to live and meant to see it through. Whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else, side by side, refusing to break, claiming the life they'd fought so hard to build. The desert wind blew warm across the yard, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried. And on a small ranch at the edge of nowhere, two people who'd been broken by the world began the work of making themselves whole. The first weeks after Harrison's departure passed in strange, suspended quiet. Every morning, Ayla woke expecting to hear hoofbeats in the yard, to see dust rising on the horizon that meant the army had changed its mind. Every evening, she and Colton sat on the porch watching the sunset, half convinced this fragile peace couldn't possibly last. But it did. Days stretched into weeks. The well that Colton had been nursing along finally broke through to a deeper vein of water, turning the trickle into a steady flow. The cattle grew fat on the sparse desert grass, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tension that had kept them both wound tight began to ease. "We might actually survive this," Colton said one evening, more to himself than to her. Ayla looked at him, at the way the fading light caught the silver in his hair and the lines around his eyes. He'd aged in the months since finding her, the stress and violence and constant vigilance taking their toll. But there was something else there too, a softness that hadn't existed before, a peace settling into the hard angles of his face. "We already have survived," she said. "Now we get to figure out what comes after surviving. Any ideas?" She smiled. "A few." The changes started small. Colton expanded the garden, building raised beds that Ayla could tend from her platform without straining her back. She organized the workshop, creating a dedicated space for leatherwork where she could take on commissions from neighboring ranchers. Word spread slowly, carried by the few travelers who passed through, that there was a craftsman out at the Vance Ranch who did excellent work at fair prices. They were careful never to mention that the craftsman was a woman, or tribal, or anything that might draw unwanted attention. As far as the world knew, Colton lived alone and did his own leather work in his spare time. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Some truths were still too dangerous to share. 3 months after Harrison's visit, a rider appeared on the horizon. Ayla spotted him first and felt the old fear spike in her chest. But the rider was alone, moving slowly, leading a pack horse laden with goods. A trader, not a threat. Colton went out to meet him while Ayla stayed inside, watching through the gap in the shutters. The conversation was brief and businesslike. The trader had supplies, flour, coffee, ammunition, fabric, and was willing to trade for leatherwork or cash. Colton bought what they needed and sent the man on his way without inviting him to linger. But before leaving, the trader mentioned something that made Colton go very still. "Heard some interesting news from Fort McDaniel," the trader said, adjusting his hat. "Colonel Harrison retired last month, gave a whole speech about how the Indian Wars were over, how it was time to focus on building instead of destroying. Caused quite a stir, apparently." "Is that so?" Colton kept his voice neutral. "Yep. Word is the territorial governor wasn't pleased, but Harrison had enough support from other officers that they couldn't just dismiss him. So they let him retire with honors and tried to pretend like nothing happened." The trader grinned. "But between you and me, I think the old man might have actually changed some minds. Haven't heard about any new campaigns being organized since he left. After the trader rode away, Colton came back inside and told Ayla everything. He kept his word, she said quietly. And maybe did more than that. Sounds like it. Colton sat down heavily. Doesn't mean we're safe. One sympathetic colonel doesn't change government policy. No, but it's something. Ayla moved closer, taking his hand. It's hope that things might actually get better instead of worse. Hope's dangerous. So is giving up. He smiled at that, squeezing her hand. When did you get so optimistic? When I stopped waiting to die and started planning to live. That night, lying in the darkness with Colton's steady breathing beside her, Ayla let herself imagine a future beyond mere survival. A real life, built on solid ground instead of shifting sand. Children, maybe, if that was possible. Or if not children, then something else to nurture and grow. A legacy that proved she'd existed, that she'd mattered, that she'd left the world different than she'd found it. It was a dangerous dream. But then again, everything worth having was. The seasons turned. Summer's brutal heat gave way to autumn's crisp mornings and cool evenings. Ayla's stumps had long since healed completely, the scars fading to silver lines against her skin. She'd learned to move with such efficiency on her platform that she barely thought about it anymore. It was simply part of her, an extension of her body as natural as hands or arms. She'd also been experimenting with other methods of mobility. Using crutches that Colton had fashioned, she could stand upright for short periods, bearing her weight on her arms and what remained of her legs. It was exhausting and awkward, but it gave her a different perspective, literally, that she'd missed. "Why do you do it?" Colton asked one day, watching her practice with the crutches. "The platform works fine." "Because I can," Ayla said, breathing hard from the effort. "Because every time someone told me I couldn't do something, I proved them wrong. And because—" She paused, considering. "Because I don't want to be defined by what I lost. I want to be defined by what I built from the ruins." Colton looked at her with such raw admiration that it made her breath catch. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, you're the strongest person I've ever met." "I'm not strong. I'm stubborn." "Same thing, in the ways that matter." She laughed and nearly lost her balance. Colton caught her easily, steadying her until she could regain her equilibrium. "Careful," he said softly. "Always am." Liar. They stood there for a moment, close enough that Ayla could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the flecks of gold in his gray-blue eyes. Her heart hammered, and not from the exertion of standing. "Colton," she said quietly. "Ask me." "Ask you what?" "You know what." He did know. She could see it in the way his expression shifted, uncertainty and hope warring in his face. They'd been dancing around this for months, this thing between them that had grown from necessity into something infinitely more complicated and precious. "Ayla Redhawk," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will." Colton kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We can't do it officially," he said, practical even in this moment. "No preacher would marry us, and even if one would, the paperwork would raise questions we can't answer." "I don't need paperwork. I don't need official recognition." Ayla cupped his face in her hands. "I just need you to stand with me and make the same promise I'm making to you. Everything else is just details." "What promise?" "That we choose each other, every day, for as long as we both live. That we build this life together as equals. That when the world tries to break us, we stand together and refuse to fall." "I can make that promise." Colton's voice was thick. "I am making that promise. Right now. To you. Forever." "Then we're married. Everything else is just ceremony." They held each other in the fading afternoon light, two broken people who'd found wholeness in the most unlikely place. Around them, the ranch continued its quiet existence, the cattle lowing softly, the wind whispering through the rocks, the land itself bearing witness to their union. That night, they made it official in the only way that mattered to them. They stood together on the porch under a canopy of stars, and they spoke their vows aloud to the desert and the sky and whatever forces governed the universe. Colton went first. I promise to stand with you against whatever comes, to honor your strength and your choice, to build a life worthy of the sacrifice we've both made to be here, to love you with everything I have for as long as I draw breath. Ayla's turn. I promise to choose you every day, to fight beside you, not behind you, to build something from the ashes that no one can take away, to love you not despite our scars, but because of everything we've survived to get here. They sealed their vows with a kiss, and if the stars seemed brighter that night, if the wind carried a particular warmth, well, perhaps the universe approved. Winter came hard that year, bringing storms that dumped snow in the high country and sent temperatures plummeting even in the desert lowlands. Colton and Ayla prepared carefully, stockpiling firewood and supplies, making sure the cattle had adequate shelter. The work was hard, but they'd developed a rhythm, him handling tasks that required standing and reaching, her managing everything that could be done from a seated position. Between them, they accomplished more than most able-bodied people working alone. On the darkest night of winter, when the temperature dropped so low that ice formed in the water buckets, they huddled together by the fire, and Colton asked the question that had been hovering between them for months. Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life instead of, I don't know, something easier? Ayla considered this question seriously. Did she regret surviving the ravine? Regret the long, painful recovery, the loss of her legs, the constant vigilance required to stay hidden and safe? Regret choosing this isolated ranch and this scarred man over the possibility of finding her people or starting fresh somewhere else? No, she said finally. I don't regret it. This isn't the life I would have chosen if given infinite options, but it's the life I built from the pieces I had left, and it's mine, ours. That makes it precious. Even with everything you've lost? I've lost my legs, my people, my old way of life. Ayla shifted to look at him directly. But I've gained things too. Skills I never would have developed. Strength I didn't know I had. And you. She touched his face gently. Especially you, so no, I don't regret it. Do you? Never. Colton pulled her closer. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, even if the circumstances were terrible. We made something good from something terrible. That's all anyone can do. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, both lost in their own thoughts about the strange paths that had led them here. Spring arrived with a rush of wildflowers and new grass, and with it came visitors. Ayla was working in the garden when she heard Colton's warning whistle, the one that meant company was coming. She rolled quickly to the house and positioned herself in the cellar entrance, ready to drop down if needed. But Colton's next whistle was the all-clear signal. Cautiously, Ayla moved to the window to look. Two riders approached, but these weren't cavalry or bounty hunters. They were native, a man and a woman, both looking worn and wary but not hostile. The man raised his hand in the universal gesture of peace. Ayla's heart hammered. She recognized them, though it took a moment to place from where. The man was Nawel, her cousin, the one who'd left her the water and knife in the ravine before fleeing with the rest of the tribe. The woman was his wife, Kiona. They'd found her. Colton met them in the yard, rifle visible but not raised. Ayla watched as they spoke, saw Nahuel gesture toward the house, saw Colton's careful nod. Then Colton turned and called back. Ayla, you might want to come out here. She hesitated only a moment before rolling onto the porch. Nahuel's eyes went wide when he saw her, his face cycling through shock, relief, and something that might have been shame. Ayla, he breathed, you're alive. Surprised? She kept her voice neutral, unsure what she felt seeing him again. We thought, when we left you, Nahuel's voice broke. We thought you were dead. We had to leave, had to save the others, but every day since I've carried the guilt of abandoning you. You did what you had to do, did we? He looked at the platform, at her missing legs, at the obvious evidence of her survival and adaptation. Or did we take the easy path and tell ourselves there was no choice? Kiona stepped forward. We've been looking for you. We heard rumors, stories of a rancher who did exceptional leather work, who lived alone but seemed to have help. We thought maybe, possibly. She trailed off, eyes bright with tears. I'm so glad we were right. Ayla felt her own throat tighten. How many survived? 37. We've scattered, trying to blend in, find ways to live without drawing attention. Nahuel's expression was heavy. It's not the life we had, but it's life. We're adapting. Like I did. Yes, though I think you've adapted better than most. He glanced at Colton, then back to her. Is he good to you? He saved my life, and then he helped me rebuild it. Ayla looked at Colton, saw the tension in his shoulders as he tried to read the situation. He's my husband, in every way that matters. Nahuel absorbed this, and slowly his expression shifted from concern to something like approval. Then you found your place. I have. What about you? Why are you here? To see if the rumors were true, to apologize if they were. And Kiona reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in soft leather. To bring you this. Your mother made it before she died. We saved it from the raid. She handed the bundle to Ayla, who unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside was a dress, traditional style, decorated with intricate beadwork and patterns that told her family's story. Her mother's hands had stitched every bead, hours and hours of patient work. Ayla pressed the fabric to her face, breathing in the faint scent that might have been her imagination, but felt like home. Thank you, she whispered. They talked for an hour, sharing news and stories, catching up on survival and adaptation. Nahuel and Kiona had settled on a ranch 30 miles south, working as laborers in exchange for room and board. It wasn't ideal, but it was safe, and it was honest work. Others have found similar arrangements, Nahuel explained. We stay quiet, keep our heads down, don't cause trouble. Some have even managed to buy land, though they had to use white intermediaries to do it. And no one bothers you? Some do. There's always someone who sees us as either a threat or cheap labor to exploit. But we're learning to navigate it, learning which fights to take and which to walk away from. He smiled slightly. Like you learned, I think. Before they left, Nahuel pulled Ayla aside. I need to say this. I'm sorry for leaving you, for choosing survival over loyalty, for every day since that I've been alive while thinking you were dead. His voice was raw. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to hear it. Ayla looked at her cousin, this man who'd grown up with her, who'd taught her to track deer and string a bow, who'd carried the weight of an impossible choice for months. I forgive you, she said quietly, because I understand now. Survival requires hard choices. You did what you had to do, and I did what I had to do. We both survived. That's what matters. Are you happy here? She considered the question honestly. Yes. Not in the way I would have been happy in our old life, but in a different way. A deeper way, maybe. I've built something here that's mine, that no one can take away, and I found someone who sees me. Not the broken warrior, not the burden, just me. That's worth everything. Nahuel embraced her carefully, and Ayla let herself lean into the familiar comfort of family. When they separated, both had tears on their faces. If you ever need anything, Nahuel said, anything at all, you send word. We take care of our own. I know, same goes for you. After they rode away, Ayla sat on the porch holding her mother's dress and crying, deep, wrenching sobs that she'd been holding back for months. Colton sat beside her, saying nothing, just being present while she mourned everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. When the tears finally stopped, she felt lighter, cleaner, as if something that had been stuck inside her had finally broken free. You all right? Colton asked gently. Yeah, I think I am. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. For the first time since the ravine, I actually think I might be. Summer brought new challenges and new growth. The ranch prospered in small but meaningful ways. The cattle multiplied. The garden produced more than they needed, allowing them to trade vegetables for other goods. Ayla's leatherwork commissions increased to the point where she had to turn some away. They were building something sustainable, something that could last. But the real change came in August, when a young couple arrived looking for work. They'd traveled from the east, hoping to establish themselves in the territories, but had run out of money and options. The man, Thomas, had experience with cattle. The woman, Sarah, could cook and manage a household. Colton was inclined to turn them away. They didn't need help, and more people meant more complications. But Ayla saw something in Sarah's eyes, a desperation she recognized, a need for safety and stability that transcended mere employment. "Hire them," she told Colton that night. "Why? We can handle everything ourselves." "Because they need us. And because—" She paused, working through her thoughts. "Because I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending I don't exist. If we hire them, I can be visible. Sarah can be the face of the household for any visitors, but I don't have to live in the shadows anymore." Colton was quiet for a long time. "That's a risk." "Everything's a risk, but I think it's a calculated one. Thomas and Sarah are desperate enough that they won't ask questions, and having them here actually provides cover. If anyone comes around asking about the household, they'll see a normal ranch with hired help, not a fugitive hiding in the cellar." "When did you get so strategic?" "I learned from the best." She smiled at him. "So what do you say? Do we take the risk?" He thought about it for another minute, then nodded. "All right, we hire them. But we're careful. We establish boundaries, make sure they understand there are parts of the ranch that are private." "Agreed." Thomas and Sarah moved into the small cabin that Colton had been using for storage. Within a week, they'd proven themselves invaluable. Thomas handled the heavy ranch work that had been straining Colton's healing injury. Sarah managed the household tasks that Ayla couldn't easily do from her platform, hanging laundry, reaching high shelves, dealing with visitors at the door. And slowly, carefully, Ayla began to emerge from hiding. She started small, working in the garden where Sarah could see her, letting Thomas catch glimpses of her rolling between buildings. The first time Sarah walked in on Ayla doing leather work, there was a moment of shock. But Sarah's surprise quickly gave way to acceptance. "You're Colton's wife," Sarah said, not quite a question. "Yes." "The one everyone thinks doesn't exist." "That's right." Sarah studied her for a moment, taking in the platform, the missing legs, the tribal features that no amount of adaptation could hide. Then she smiled. "Your secret's safe with me. Both of your secrets." From then on, an unspoken agreement existed. In front of strangers, Sarah was the ranch wife, and Ayla didn't exist. But in private, they were colleagues and eventually friends. Sarah learned about Ayla's past in fragments and pieces, and never once judged or questioned her right to be there. "You know what I think?" Sarah said one day while they worked together preserving vegetables for winter. "I think you and Colton have built something remarkable here. Not just a successful ranch, but a real home. A place where people can be themselves without fear. That's rare. It feels fragile sometimes. The best things usually do, but that doesn't make them less real." The years began to pass, measured not in dramatic events, but in small, steady progress. The ranch expanded, they bought more land, more cattle, built a proper barn, and improved the irrigation system. Thomas and Sarah married, a simple ceremony that Colton officiated, since no formal authority would recognize their union anyway, and settled into permanent residence. Ayla's leatherwork gained a reputation across the territory. People came from 50 miles away seeking her craftsmanship, though they still believed they were dealing with Colton. She didn't mind the anonymity. The work itself was enough. And somewhere along the way, without anyone quite noticing when it happened, Ayla stopped being a fugitive hiding from the world and became simply a person living her life. The nightmares faded. The constant vigilance relaxed. She could sit on the porch at sunset without scanning for threats, could work in the garden without one ear tuned for the sound of approaching horses. She was, improbably and against all odds, at peace. On the 5th anniversary of the day Colton had found her in the ravine, they rode out together to the spot where it had all begun. Colton had rigged a special saddle that allowed Ayla to ride despite her missing legs, and though it was awkward and required Colton's help to mount and dismount, she treasured the freedom it gave her. They stood at the edge of the ravine, looking down at the place where she'd waited to die. "What do you think?" Colton asked. "When you look at it now?" Ayla considered the question carefully. "I think about how close I came to giving up, how easy it would have been to just let go and slip away. And I think about everything I would have missed if I had. Do you ever wish things had gone differently? That you'd never been injured, never lost your people, never ended up here? Sometimes. But then I remember that those other paths don't lead to you, don't lead to this life we've built. And I can't wish that away, even for legs or tribe or anything else. She looked at him. Do you ever wish you'd left me here? Never. Not once. Colton took her hand. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Gave me a reason to care again. To build, instead of just survive. You saved me as much as I saved you. They stood there for a while longer, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and built something stronger than either could have managed alone. As they rode back to the ranch, Ayla looked out over the land they'd worked so hard to tame and nurture. The cattle grazed peacefully. The buildings stood solid against the desert wind. Smoke rose from the chimney where Sarah was preparing dinner. It was a small life by some measures, isolated, hard-won, built on secrets and compromises and the determination to survive despite everything the world had thrown at them. But it was theirs. Completely, utterly, undeniably theirs. And that made it perfect. That night, lying in bed with Colton's arm around her and the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into sleep around them, Ayla thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and loss and desperate struggle. The moments where death had seemed not just possible but inevitable. The choices, both hers and others, that had led to this exact moment. She'd started as a warrior defending her people, been reduced to a broken body left to rot in a ravine, been saved by a stranger who had no reason to care, and through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat, she'd rebuilt herself into something new. Not the warrior she'd been, not the person she might have become if history had gone differently, but someone stronger, someone who'd faced the absolute worst and come out the other side not just alive but genuinely, deeply content with the life she'd claimed from the ashes. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. Colton stirred. For what? For seeing me in that ravine and making the choice to care. For giving me a reason to keep fighting. For building this life with me. He pulled her closer. Thank you for trusting me. For choosing to stay when you could have left. For making me believe in tomorrow again. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, two broken people who'd found wholeness in the spaces between heartbeats. The desert wind blew soft across the land, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. And in a small ranch at the edge of nowhere, surrounded by hard-won peace and harder-won love, two people who'd been left for dead discovered what it meant to truly live. Not in spite of what they'd lost, but because of what they'd found. Together.